The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, Section 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Volume 1 of The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. Section 6. After this the Sultan turned towards the young Prince and said, "O youth, thou hast removed one grief only to add another grief. But now, O my friend, where is she, and where is the mausoleum wherein lieth the wounded slave?" "The slave lieth under yon dome," quoth the young man, "and she sitteth in the chamber fronting yonder door. And every day at sunrise she cometh forth, and first strippeth me, and whippeth me with 100 strokes of the leathern scourge, and I weep and shriek, but there is no power of motion in my lower limbs to keep her off. After ending her tormenting me, she visiteth the slave, bringing him wine and boiled meats. And tomorrow at an early hour she will be here." Quoth the King, "By Allah, O youth, I will assuredly do thee a good deed which the world shall not willingly let die, and an act of daring do which shall be chronicled long after I am dead and gone by." Then the King sat him by the side of the young Prince and talked till nightfall, when he lay down and slept. But as soon as the false dawn showed, he arose and, doffing his outer garments, bared his blade and hastened to the place wherein lay the slave. Then he was ware of lighted candles and lamps, and the perfume of incenses and unguents, and directed by these he made for the slave and struck him one stroke, killing him on the spot, after which he lifted him on his back and threw him into a well that was in the palace. Presently he returned and, donning the slave's gear, lay down at length within the mausoleum, with the drawn sword laid close to and along his side. After an hour or so the accursed witch came and, first going to her husband, she stripped off his clothes and, taking a whip, flogged him cruelly, while he cried out, "Ah, enough for me the case I am in! Take pity on me, O my cousin!" But she replied, "Didst thou take pity on me and spare the life of my true love on whom I doted?" Then she drew the cilice over his raw and bleeding skin and threw the robe upon all, and went down to the slave with a goblet of wine and a bowl of meat broth in her hands. She entered under the dome, weeping and wailing, "Well away!" and crying, "O my lord, speak a word to me! O my master, talk a while with me!" and began to recite these couplets: "How long this harshness, this unlove shall bide? Suffice thee not tear floods thou hast espied? Thou dost prolong our parting purposely, and if wouldst please my foe, thou'rt satisfied." Then she wept again and said, "O my lord, speak to me, talk with me." The King lowered his voice and, twisting his tongue, spoke after the fashion of the blackamoors and said, "Lack! Lack! There be no majesty and there be no might save in Allah, the glorious, the great!" Now when she heard these words she shouted for joy and fell to the ground fainting, and when her senses returned she asked, "O my lord, can it be true that thou hast power of speech?" And the King, making his voice small and faint, answered, "O my cuss, dost thou deserve that I talk to thee and speak with thee?" "Why and wherefore?" rejoined she, and he replied, "The why is that all the livelong day thou tormentest thy hubby, and he keeps calling on Heaven for aid, until sleep is strange to me even from evening till morning. And he prays and damns, cussing us two, me and thee, causing me disquiet and much bother. Were this not so, I should long ago have got my health, and it is this which prevents my answering thee." Quoth she, "With thy leave I will release him from what spell is on him." And quoth the King, "Release him and let's have some rest." She cried, "To hear is to obey," and going from the cenotaph to the palace, she took a metal bowl and filled it with water and spake over it certain words, which made the contents bubble and boil as a cauldron seetheth over the fire. With this she sprinkled her husband, saying, By virtue of the dread words I have spoken, if thou becamest thus by my spells, come forth out of that form into thine own former form." And lo and behold! the young man shook and trembled, then rose to his feet and, rejoicing at his deliverance, cried aloud, "I testify that there is no god but the God, and in very truth Mohammed is his apostle, whom Allah bless and keep!" Then she said to him, "Go forth and return not hither, for if thou do I will surely slay thee," screaming these words in his face. So he went from between her hands and she returned to the dome, and going down to the sepulchre she said, "O my lord, come forth to me that I may look upon thee and thy goodliness." The King replied in faint low words, "What thing hast thou done? Thou hast rid me of the branch, but not of the root." She asked, "O my darling, O my negro King, what is the root?" And he answered, "Fie on thee, O my cuss! The people of this city and of the four islands, every night when it's half past, lift their heads from the tank in which thou hast turned them to fishes, and cry to heaven and call down its anger on me and thee, and this is the reason why my body's baulked from health. Go at once and set them free, then come to me and take my hand and raise me up, for a little strength is already back in me." When she heard the King's words, and she still supposed him to be the slave, she cried joyously, "O my master, on my head and on my eyes be thy command! Bismillah!" So she sprang to her feet and, full of joy and gladness, ran down to the tarn and took a little of its water in the palm of her hand. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the Ninth Night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the young woman, the sorceress, took in hand some of the tarn water and spake over it words not to be understood, the fishes lifted their heads and stood up on the instant like men, the spell on the people of the city having been removed. What was the lake again became a crowded capital. The bazaars were thronged with folk who bought and sold. Each citizen was occupied with his own calling, and the four hills became islands as they were whilome. Then the young woman, that wicked sorceress, returned to the King and, still thinking he was the negro, said to him, "O my love, stretch forth thy honoured hand that I may assist thee to rise." "Nearer to me," quoth the King in a faint and feigned tone. She came close as to embrace him, when he took up the sword lying hid by his side and smote her across the breast, so that the point showed gleaming behind her back. Then he smote her a second time and cut her in twain and cast her to the ground in two halves. After which he fared forth and found the young man, now freed from the spell, awaiting him and gave him joy of his happy release, while the King kissed his hand with abundant thanks. Quoth the King, "Wilt thou abide in this city or go with me to my capital?" Quoth the youth, "O King of the age, wottest thou not what journey is between thee and thy city?" 2 days and a half, answered he. Whereupon said the other, "An thou be sleeping, O King, awake! Between thee and thy city is a year's march for a well girt walker, and thou haddest not come hither in 2 days and a half, save that the city was under enchantment. And I, O King, will never part from thee, no, not even for the twinkling of an eye." The King rejoiced at his words and said, "Thanks be to Allah who hath bestowed thee upon me! From this hour thou art my son and my only son, for that in all my life I have never been blessed with issue." Thereupon they embraced and joyed with exceeding great joy, and reaching the palace, the Prince who had been spellbound informed his lords and his grandees that he was about to visit the holy places as a pilgrim, and bade them get ready all things necessary for the occasion. The preparations lasted 10 days, after which he set out with the Sultan, whose heart burned in yearning for his city whence he had been absent a whole 12 month. They journeyed with an escort of Mamluks, carrying all manner of precious gifts and rarities; nor stinted they wayfaring day and night for a full year until they approached the Sultan's capital, and sent on messengers to announce their coming. Then the Wazir and the whole army came out to meet him in joy and gladness, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their king, and the troops kissed the ground before him and wished him joy of his safety. He entered and took seat upon his throne, and the Minister came before him, and when acquainted with all that had befallen the young Prince, he congratulated him on his narrow escape. When order was restored throughout the land, the King gave largesse to many of his people, and said to the Wazir, "Hither the fisherman who brought us the fishes." So he sent for the man who had been the first cause of the city and the citizens being delivered from enchantment, and when he came into the presence, the Sultan bestowed upon him a dress of honour and questioned him of his condition and whether he had children. The fisherman gave him to know that he had two daughters and a son; so the King sent for them and, taking one daughter to wife, gave the other to the young Prince and made the son his head treasurer. Furthermore he invested his Wazir with the Sultanate of the city in the Black Islands, whilome belonging to the young Prince, and dispatched him the escort of 50 armed slaves together with dresses of honour for all the Emirs and Grandees. The Wazir kissed hands and fared forth on his way, while the Sultan and the Prince abode at home in all the solace and the delight of life, and the fisherman became the richest man of his age, and his daughters wived with kings until death came to them. And yet, O King, this is not more wondrous than the story of the Porter and the three ladies of Baghdad. Once upon a time there was a porter in Baghdad who was a bachelor and who would remain unmarried. It came to pass on a certain day, as he stood about the street leaning idly upon his crate, behold, there stood before him an honourable woman in a mantilla of Mosul silk, broidered with gold and bordered with brocade. Her walking shoes were also purfled with gold, and her hair floated in long plaits. She raised her face veil and, showing two black eyes fringed with jetty lashes, whose glances were soft and languishing, and whose perfect beauty was ever blandishing, she accosted the porter and said in the suavest tones and choicest language, "Take up thy crate and follow me." The porter was so dazzled he could hardly believe that he heard her aright, but he shouldered his basket in hot haste, saying in himself, "O day of good luck! O day of Allah's grace!" and walked after her till she stopped at the door of a house. There she rapped, and presently came out to her an old man, a Nazarene, to whom she gave a gold piece, receiving from him in return what she required of strained wine clear as olive oil, and she set it safely in the hamper, saying, "Lift and follow." Quoth the porter, "This, by Allah, is indeed an auspicious day, a day propitious for the granting of all a man wisheth." He again hoisted up the crate and followed her, till she stopped at a fruiterer's shop and bought from him Shami apples and Osmani quinces and Omani peaches and cucumbers of Nile growth and Egyptian limes and Sultani oranges and citrons, besides Aleppine jasmine, scented myrtle berries, Damascene nenuphars, flower of privet and chamomile, blood red anemones, violets and pomegranate bloom, eglantine and narcissus, and set the whole in the porter's crate, saying, "Up with it!" So he lifted and followed her till she stopped at a butcher's booth and said, "Cut me off 10 pounds of mutton." She paid him his price and he wrapped it in a banana leaf, whereupon she laid it in the crate and said, "Hoist, O porter!" He hoisted accordingly and followed her as she walked on till she stopped at a grocer's, where she bought dry fruits and pistachio kernels, Tihama raisins, shelled almonds and all wanted for dessert, and said to the porter, "Lift and follow me." So he up with his hamper and after her till she stayed at the confectioner's, and she bought an earthen platter and piled it with all kinds of sweetmeats in his shop, openwork tarts and fritters scented with musk, and soap cakes and lemon loaves and melon preserves and Zaynab's combs and ladies' fingers and Kazi's titbits and goodies of every description, and placed the platter in the porter's crate. Thereupon quoth he, being a merry man, "Thou shouldest have told me, and I would have brought with me a pony or a she camel to carry all this market stuff." She smiled and gave him a little cuff on the nape, saying, "Step out and exceed not in words, for, Allah willing, thy wage will not be wanting." Then she stopped at a perfumer's and took from him 10 sorts of waters, rose scented with musk, orange flower, water lily, willow flower, violet and 5 others; and she also bought 2 loaves of sugar, a bottle for perfume spraying, a lump of male incense, aloe wood, ambergris and musk, with candles of Alexandria wax; and she put the whole into the basket, saying, "Up with thy crate and after me." He did so and followed until she stood before the greengrocers, of whom she bought pickled safflower and olives in brine and in oil, with tarragon and cream cheese and hard Syrian cheese; and she stowed them away in the crate, saying to the Porter, "Take up thy basket and follow me." He did so and went after her till she came to a fair mansion fronted by a spacious court, a tall fine place to which columns gave strength and grace, and the gate thereof had 2 leaves of ebony inlaid with plates of red gold. The lady stopped at the door and, turning her face veil sideways, knocked softly with her knuckles, whilst the Porter stood behind her, thinking of naught save her beauty and loveliness. Presently the door swung back and both leaves were opened, whereupon he looked to see who had opened it, and behold, it was a lady of tall figure, some 5 feet high, a model of beauty and loveliness, brilliance and symmetry and perfect grace. Her forehead was flower white, her cheeks like the anemone, ruddy bright; her eyes were those of the wild heifer or the gazelle, with eyebrows like the crescent moon which ends Sha'ban and begins Ramadan. Her mouth was the ring of Sulayman, her lips coral red, and her teeth like a line of strung pearls or of chamomile petals. Her throat recalled the antelope's, and her breasts, like 2 pomegranates of even size, stood at bay as it were. Her body rose and fell in waves below her dress like the rolls of a piece of brocade, and her navel would hold an ounce of benzoin ointment. In fine, she was like her of whom the poet said, "On sun and moon of Palace cast thy sight; enjoy her flower like face, her fragrant light. Thine eyes shall never see in hair so black beauty encase a brow so purely white. The ruddy rose cheek proclaims her claim, though fail her name whose beauties we indite. As sways her gait I smile at hips so big, and weep to see the waist they bear so slight." When the Porter looked upon her his wits were waylaid and his senses were stormed, so that his crate went nigh to fall from his head, and he said to himself, "Never have I in my life seen a day more blessed than this day." Then quoth the lady portress to the lady cateress, "Come in from the gate and relieve this poor man of his load." So the provisioner went in followed by the portress and the Porter, and went on till they reached a spacious ground floor hall, built with admirable skill and beautified with all manner colours and carvings, with upper balconies and groined arches and galleries and cupboards and recesses whose curtains hung before them. In the midst stood a great basin full of water surrounding a fine fountain, and at the upper end on the raised dais was a couch of juniper wood, set with gems and pearls, with a canopy like mosquito curtains of red satin silk looped up with pearls as big as filberts and bigger. Thereupon sat a lady bright of blee, with brow beaming brilliancy, the dream of philosophy, whose eyes were fraught with Babel's gramarye, and her eyebrows were arched as for archery, her breath breathed ambergris and perfumery, and her lips were sugar to taste and carnelian to see. Her stature was straight as the letter E, and her face shamed the noon sun's radiancy, and she was even as a galaxy or a dome with golden marquetry, or a bride displayed in choicest finery, or a noble maid of Araby. Right well of her sang the bard when he said, "Her smiles twin rows of pearls display, chamomile buds or rimy spray; her tresses stray as night let down, and shames her light the dawn o' day." The third lady, rising from the couch, stepped forward with graceful swaying gait till she reached the middle of the saloon, when she said to her sisters, Why stand ye here? Take it down from this poor man's head. Then the cateress went and stood before him, and the portress behind him, while the third helped them, and they lifted the load from the porter's head and, emptying it of all that was therein, set everything in its place. Lastly they gave him 2 gold pieces, saying, "Wend thy ways, O porter!" But he went not, for he stood looking at the ladies and admiring what uncommon beauty was theirs, and their pleasant manners and kindly dispositions; never had he seen goodlier. And he gazed wistfully at that good store of wines and sweet scented flowers and fruits and other matters. Also he marvelled with exceeding marvel, especially to see no man in the place, and delayed his going. Whereupon quoth the eldest lady, "What aileth thee that goest not? Haply thy wage be too little?" And turning to her sister the cateress, she said, "Give him another dinar." But the porter answered, "By Allah, my lady, it is not for the wage. My hire is never more than 2 dirhams. But in very sooth my heart and my soul are taken up with you and your condition. I wonder to see you single, with ne'er a man about you, and not a soul to bear you company; and well you wot that the minaret toppleth over unless it stand upon 4, and you want this same 4th. And women's pleasure without man is short of measure, even as the poet said, "Cease not, we want for joy 4 things all told, the harp and lute, the flute and flageolet, and be they companied with scents 4-fold, rose, myrtle, anemone and violet. Nor please all 8, an 4 thou wouldst withhold, good wine and youth and gold and pretty pet. You be there and want a 4th, who shall be a person of good sense and prudence, smart witted, and one apt to keep careful counsel." His words pleased and amused them much, and they laughed at him and said, "And who is to assure us of that? We are maidens, and we fear to entrust our secret where it may not be kept; for we have read in a certain chronicle the lines of one Ibn as-Summam: Hold fast thy secret and to none unfold; Lost is a secret when that secret's told. An fail thy breast thy secret to conceal, How canst thou hope another's breast shall hold?" And Abu Nawas said well on the same subject: "Who trusteth secret to another's hand, Upon his brow deserveth burn of brand." When the porter heard their words he rejoined, "By your lives, I am a man of sense and a discreet, who hath read books and perused chronicles. I reveal the fair and conceal the foul, and I act as the poet adviseth. None but the good a secret keep, and good men keep it unrevealed. It is to me a well shut house, with keyless locks and door ensealed." When the maidens heard his verse and its poetical application addressed to them, they said, "Thou knowest that we have laid out all our monies on this place. Now say, hast thou aught to offer us in return for entertainment? For surely we will not suffer thee to sit in our company, and be our cup companion, and gaze upon our faces so fair and so rare, without paying a round sum. Wottest thou not the saying, Sans hope of gain, love's not worth a grain?" Whereto the lady portress added, "If thou bring anything, thou art a something; if nothing, be off with thee, thou art a nothing." But the procuratrix interposed, saying, "Nay, O my sisters, leave teasing him, for by Allah he hath not failed us this day, and had he been other he never had kept patience with me; so whatever be his shot and scot, I will take it upon myself." The porter, overjoyed, kissed the ground before her and thanked her, saying, "By Allah, these monies are the first fruits this day hath given me." Hearing this they said, "Sit thee down and welcome to thee." And the eldest lady added, "By Allah, we may not suffer thee to join us save on one condition, and this it is, that no questions be asked as to what concerneth thee not, and frowardness shall be soundly flogged." Answered the porter, "I agree to this, my lady, on my head and my eyes be it. Look ye, I am dumb, I have no tongue." Then arose the provisioneress and, tightening her girdle, set the table by the fountain, and put the flowers and sweet herbs in their jars, and strained the wine and ranged the flasks in row and made ready every requisite. Then sat she down, she and her sisters, placing amidst them the porter, who kept deeming himself in a dream, and she took up the wine flagon and poured out the first cup and drank it off, and likewise a second and a third. After this she filled a fourth cup, which she handed to one of her sisters, and lastly she crowned a goblet and passed it to the Porter, saying, "Drink the dear draught, drink free and fain, what healeth every grief and pain." He took the cup in his hand and, louting low, returned his best thanks and improvised, "Drain not the bowl save with a trusty friend, a man of worth who's good and old, for wine like wind sucks sweetness from the sweet, and stinks when over stench it haply blow," adding, "Drain not the bowl save from dear hand like thine, the cup recall thy gifts, thou gifts of wine." After repeating this couplet he kissed their hands and drank and was drunk, and sat swaying from side to side and pursued, "All drinks wherein is blood the law unclean doth hold, save one, the blood shed of the vine. Fill, fill, take all my wealth bequeathed or won, thou fawn, a willing ransom for those eyne." Then the cateress crowned a cup and gave it to the portress, who took it from her hand and thanked her and drank. Thereupon she poured again and passed to the eldest lady who sat on the couch, and filled yet another and handed it to the Porter. He kissed the ground before them, and after drinking and thanking them he again began to recite, "Here, here, by Allah, here! Cups of the sweet, the dear! Fill me a brimming bowl, the fount of life I spear." Then the Porter stood up before the mistress of the house and said, "O lady, I am thy slave, thy Mamluk, thy white thrall, thy very bondsman." And he began reciting, "A slave of slaves there standeth at thy door, lauding thy generous boons and gifts galore. Beauty! may he come in awhile to joy thy charms? For love and I part nevermore." She said to him, "Drink, and health and happiness attend thy drink." So he took the cup and kissed her hand and recited these lines in sing song: "I gave her brave old wine that like her cheeks blushed red, or flame from furnace flaring up. She bussed the brim and said with many a smile, How durst thou deal folk's cheek for folk to sup? Drink, said I, these are tears of mine whose tinct is heart blood sighs have boiled in the cup." She answered him in the following couplet: "And tears of blood for me, friend, thou hast shed, suffer me sup them by thy head and eyes." Then the lady took the cup and drank it off to her sister's health, and they ceased not drinking, the Porter being in the midst of them, and dancing and laughing and reciting verses and singing ballads and ritornellos. All this time the Porter was carrying on with them, kissing, toying, biting, handling, groping, fingering, whilst one thrust a dainty morsel in his mouth and another slapped him, and this cuffed his cheeks and that threw sweet flowers at him, and he was in the very paradise of pleasure, as though he were sitting in the seventh sphere among the Houris of heaven. They ceased not doing after this fashion until the wine played tucks in their heads and worsted their wits, and when the drink got the better of them, the portress stood up and doffed her clothes till she was mother naked. However, she let down her hair about her body by way of a shift, and throwing herself into the basin disported herself and dived like a duck, and swam up and down and took water in her mouth and spurted it all over the Porter, and washed her limbs and between her breasts and inside her thighs and all around her navel. Then she came up out of the cistern and throwing herself on the Porter's lap said, "O my lord, O my love, what callest thou this article?" pointing to her slit, her solution of continuity. "I call that thy cleft," quoth the Porter, and she rejoined, "Wah! Wah! art thou not ashamed to use such a word?" And she caught him by the collar and soundly cuffed him. Said he again, "Thy womb, thy vulva," and she struck him a second slap, crying, "Oh fie, fie! this is another ugly word. Is here no shame in thee?" Quoth he, "Thy coynte," and she cried, "O thou art wholly destitute of modesty," and thumped and bashed him. Then cried the Porter, "Thy clitoris," whereat the eldest lady came down upon him with a yet sorer beating and said, "No!" And he said, "'Tis so." And the Porter went on calling the same commodity by sundry other names, but whatever he said they beat him more and more, till his neck ached and swelled with the blows he had gotten. And on this wise they made him a butt and a laughing stock. At last he turned upon them, asking, "And what do you women call this article?" Whereto the damsel made answer, "The basil of the bridges." Cried the Porter, "Thank Allah for my safety! Aid me and be thou propitious, O basil of the bridges!" They passed round the cup and tossed off the bowl again, when the second lady stood up and, stripping off all her clothes, cast herself into the cistern and did as the first had done. Then she came out of the water and, throwing her naked form on the Porter's lap, pointed to her machine and said, "O light of mine eyes, do tell me what is the name of this concern." He replied as before, "Thy slit." And she rejoined, "Hath such term no shame for thee?" and cuffed him and buffeted him till the saloon rang with the blows. Then quoth she, "O fie, fie! How canst thou say this without blushing?" He suggested, "The basil of the bridges," but she would not have it and said, "No, no," and struck him and slapped him on the back of the neck. Then he began calling out all the names he knew, "Thy slit, thy womb, thy coint, thy clitoris," and the girls kept on saying, "No, no." So he said, "I stick to the basil of the bridges," and all the three laughed till they fell on their backs and laid slaps on his neck and said, "No, no, that's not its proper name." Thereupon he cried, "O my sisters, what is its name?" And they replied, "What sayest thou to the husked sesame seed?" Then the cateress donned her clothes and they fell again to carousing, but the Porter kept moaning "Oh!" and "Oh!" for his neck and shoulders, and the cup passed merrily round and round again for a full hour. After that time the eldest and handsomest lady stood up and stripped off her garments, whereupon the Porter took his neck in hand and rubbed and shampooed it, saying, "My neck and shoulders are on the way of Allah." Then she threw herself into the basin and swam and dived, sported and washed, and the Porter looked at her naked figure as though she had been a slice of the moon, and at her face with the sheen of Luna when at full, or like the dawn when it brighteneth, and he noted her noble stature and shape, and those glorious forms that quivered as she went, for she was naked as the Lord made her. Then he cried, "Alack! Alack!" and began to address her, versifying in these couplets: "If I liken thy shape to the bough when green, my likeness errs and I sore mistake it; for the bough is fairest when clad the most, and thou art fairest when mother naked." When the lady heard his verses she came up out of the basin and, seating herself upon his lap and knees, pointed to her genitory and said, "O my lordling, what be the name of this?" Quoth he, "The basil of the bridges." But she said, "Bah! bah!" Quoth he, "The husked sesame." Quoth she, "Poor! poor!" Then said he, "Thy womb," and she cried, "Fie! fie! Art thou not ashamed of thyself?" and cuffed him on the nape of the neck. And whatever name he gave, declaring "'Tis so," she beat him and cried, "No, no!" till at last he said, "O my sisters, and what is its name?" She replied, "It is entitled the Khan of Abu Mansur." Whereupon the Porter replied, "Aha! O Allah be praised for safe deliverance, O Khan of Abu Mansur!" Then she came forth and dressed, and the cup went round a full hour. At last the Porter rose up and, stripping off all his clothes, jumped into the tank and swam about and washed under his bearded chin and armpits, even as they had done. Then he came out and threw himself into the first lady's lap, and rested his arms upon the lap of the portress, and reposed his legs in the lap of the cateress, and pointed to his prickle and said, "O my mistresses, what is the name of this article?" All laughed at his words till they fell on their backs, and one said, "Thy pintle." But he replied, "No," and gave each one of them a bite by way of forfeit. Then said they, "Thy pizzle." But he cried, "No," and gave each of them a hug. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. End of Section 6 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night. Volume 1.
Section 7, Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Father Ziley of Detroit. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Section 7. When it was the 10th night, quoth her sister Dunyazad, "Finish for us thy story." And she answered, "With joy and goodly greet. It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the damsel stinted not saying to the porter, Thy pickle, thy pintle, thy pizzle, and he ceased not kissing and biting and hugging until his heart was satisfied, and they laughed on till they could no more. At last one said, O our brother, what then is it called? Quoth he, Know ye not? Quoth they, No. Its veritable name, said he, is mule burst all, which browseth on the basel of the bridges, and muncheth the husked sesame, and nighteth in the khan of Abu Mansur. Then they laughed till they fell on their backs, and returned to their carousel, and ceased not to be after this fashion till night began to fall. Thereupon said they to the porter, Bismillah, O our master, up and on with those sorry old shoes of thine, and turn thy face, and show us the breadth of thy shoulders. Said he, By Allah, to part with my soul would be easier for me than departing from you. Come, let us join night today, and tomorrow morning we will wend our own way. My life on you, said the procuratrix, suffer him to tarry with us, that we may laugh at him. We may live out our lives and never meet with his like, for surely he is a right merry rogue and witty. So they said, You must not remain with us this night, save on condition that thou submit to our commands, and that whatso thou seest, thou ask no questions there anent, nor inquire of its cause. All right, rejoined he, and they said, Go read the writing over the door. So he rose and went to the entrance, and there found written in letters of gold wash, Whoso speaketh of what concerneth him not, shall hear what pleaseth him not. The porter said, Be ye witnesses against me that I will not speak on whatso concerneth me not. Then the cateress arose, and set food before them, and they ate. After which they changed their drinking place for an other, and she lighted the lamps and candles, and burned ambergris and aloes wood, and set on fresh fruit and wine service, when they fell to carousing and talking of their lovers. And they ceased not to eat and drink and chat, nibbling dry fruits and laughing and playing tricks for the space of a full hour, when lo, a knock was heard at the gate. The knocking in no wise disturbed the seance, but one of them rose and went to see what it was, and presently returned, saying, Truly our pleasure for this night is to be perfect. How is that? Asked they. And she answered, At the gate be 3 Persian calendars, with their beards and heads and eyebrows shaven, and all 3 blind of the left eye, which is surely a strange chance. They are foreigners from Roomland, with the mark of travel plain upon them. They have just entered Baghdad, this being their first visit to our city, and the cause of their knocking at our door is simply because they cannot find a lodging. Indeed, one of them said to me, Haply the owner of this mansion will let us have the key of his stable or some old outhouse, wherein we may pass this night, for evening had surprised them, and, being strangers in the land, they knew none who would give them shelter. And, O my sisters, each of them is a figure of fun after his own fashion, and if we let them in we shall have matter to make sport of. She gave not over persuading them, till they said to her, Let them in, and make thou the usual condition with them, that they speak not of what concerneth them not, lest they hear what pleaseth them not. So she rejoiced, and going to the door, presently returned with the 3 monoculars, whose beards and mustachios were clean shaven. They salamed and stood afar off by way of respect. But the 3 ladies rose up to them and welcomed them, and wished them joy of their safe arrival, and made them sit down. The Kalandars looked at the room, and saw that it was a pleasant place, clean swept and garnished with cowers, and the lamps were burning, and the smoke of perfumes was spiring in air. And beside the dessert and fruits and wine there were 3 fair girls who might be maidens. So they exclaimed with one voice, By Allah, 'tis good! Then they turned to the porter, and saw that he was a merry-faced wight, albeit he was by no means sober, and was sore after his saplings. So they thought he was one of themselves, and said, A mendicant like us, whether Arab or foreigner. But when the porter heard these words, he rose up, and fixing his eyes fiercely upon them, said, Sit ye here without exceeding in talk. Have you not read what is writ over the door? Surely it befitteth not fellows who come to us like paupers, to wag your tongues at us. We crave thy pardon, O fakir, rejoined they, and our heads are between thy hands. The ladies laughed consumedly at the squabble, and making peace between the Kalandars and the porter, seated the new guests before meat, and they ate. Then they sat together, and the portress served them with drink. And as the cup went round merrily, quoth the porter to the askers, And you, O brothers mine, have ye no story or rare adventure to amuse us withal? Now the warmth of wine having mounted to their heads, they called for musical instruments, and the portress brought them a tambourine of Mosul, and a lute of Iraq, and a Persian harp, and each mendicant took one and tuned it, this the tambourine, and those the lute and the harp, and struck up a merry tune, while the ladies sang so lustily that there was a great noise. And whilst they were carrying on, behold, someone knocked at the gate, and the portress went to see what was the matter there. Now the cause of that knocking, O king, quoth Shahrazad, was this: the Caliph Harun al-Rashid had gone forth from the palace, as was his wont now and then, to solace himself in the city that night, and to see and hear what new thing was stirring. He was in merchant's gear, and he was attended by Ja'far his wazir, and by Masrur his sworder of vengeance. As they walked about the city, their way led them towards the house of the 3 ladies, where they heard the loud noise of musical instruments, and singing and merriment. So quoth the Caliph to Ja'far, I long to enter this house, and hear those songs, and see who sing them. Quoth Ja'far, O Prince of the Faithful, these folk are surely drunken with wine, and I fear some mischief betide us if we get amongst them. There is no help but that I go in there, replied the Caliph, and I desire thee to contrive some pretext for our appearing among them. Ja'far replied, I hear and I obey, and knocked at the door, whereupon the portress came out and opened. Then Ja'far came forward, and kissing the ground before her, said, O my lady, we be merchants from Tiberias town. We arrived at Baghdad 10 days ago, and alighting at the merchant's caravanserai, we sold all our merchandise. Now a certain trader invited us to an entertainment this night, so we went to his house, and he set food before us, and we ate. Then we sat at wine and wassail with him for an hour or so, when he gave us leave to depart, and we went out from him in the shadow of the night, and, being strangers, we could not find our way back to our Khan. So haply of your kindness and courtesy you will suffer us to tarry with you this night, and heaven will reward you. The portress looked upon them, and seeing them dressed like merchants and men of grave looks and solid, she returned to her sisters and repeated to them Ja'far's story. And they took compassion upon the strangers, and said to her, Let them enter. She opened the door to them, and when they said to her, have we thy leave to come in? Come in, quoth she. And the Caliph entered, followed by Ja'afar and Masrur. And when the girls saw them, they stood up to them in respect, and made them sit down, and looked to their wants, saying, Welcome and welcome, and good cheer to the guests, but with one condition. What is that? asked they. And one of the ladies answered, Speak not of what concerneth you not, lest ye hear what pleaseth you not. Even so, said they, and sat down to their wine, and drank deep. Presently the Caliph looked on the 3 Kalandars, and seeing them each and every blind of the left eye, wondered at the sight. Then he gazed upon the girls, and he was startled, and he marvelled with exceeding marvel at their beauty and loveliness. They continued to carouse and to converse, and said to the Caliph, Drink! But he replied, I am vowed to pilgrimage, and drew back from the wine. Thereupon the portress rose, and spreading before him a tablecloth worked with gold, set thereon a porcelain bowl, to which she poured willow flower water with a lump of snow and a spoonful of sugar candy. The Caliph thanked her, and said in himself, By Allah, I will recompense her tomorrow for the kind deed she hath done. The others again addressed themselves to conversing and carousing, and when the wine gat the better of them, the eldest lady, who ruled the house, rose, and making obeisance to them, took the cateress by the hand, and said, Rise, O my sister, and let us do what is our devoir. Both answered, Even so. Then the portress stood up and proceeded to remove the table service and the remnants of the banquet, and renewed the pastiles, and cleared the middle of the saloon. Then she made the Kalandars sit upon a sofa at the side of the estrade, and seated the Caliph and Ja'afar and Masrur on the other side of the saloon. After which she called a porter and said, How scanty is thy courtesy! Now thou art no stranger, nay, thou art one of the household. So he stood up, and tightening his waistcloth, asked, What would ye I do? And she answered, Stand in thy place. Then the procuratrix arose, and set in the midst of the saloon a low chair, and opening a closet, cried to the porter, Come help me. So he went to help her, and saw 2 black bitches with chains around their necks, and she said to him, Take hold of them. And he took them and led them into the middle of the saloon. Then the lady of the house arose, and tucked up her sleeves above her wrists, and seizing a scourge, said to the porter, Bring forward one of the bitches. He brought her forward, dragging her by the chain, while the bitch wept, and shook her head at the lady, who, however, came down upon her with blows on the sconce. And the bitch howled, and the lady ceased not beating her till her forearm failed her. Then, casting the scourge from her hand, she pressed the bitch to her bosom, and wiping away her tears with her hands, kissed her head. Then she said to the porter, Take her away, and bring the second. And when he brought her, she did with her as she had done with the first. Now the heart of the Caliph was touched at these cruel doings. His chest straightened, and he lost all patience in his desire to know why the 2 bitches were so beaten. He threw a wink at Ja'afar, wishing him to ask, but the minister, turning toward him, said by signs, Be silent. Then quoth the portress to the mistress of the house, O my lady, arise and go to thy place, that I in turn may do thy devoir. She answered, Even so, and taking her seat upon the couch of juniper wood, pargetted with gold and silver, said to the portress and cateress, Now do ye what ye have to do. Thereupon the portress sat upon a low seat by the couch side, but the procuratrix, entering a closet, brought out of it a bag of satin with green fringes and 2 tassels of gold. She stood up before the lady of the house, and shaking the bag, drew out of it a lute, which she tuned by tightening its pegs, and when it was in perfect order, she began to sing these quatrains. Ye are the wish, the aim of me, and when, O love, thy sight I see, the heavenly mansion openeth, but hell I see when lost thy sight. From thee comes madness, nor the less comes highest joy, comes ecstasy. Nor in my love for thee I fear, or shame and blame, or hate and spite. When love was thrown within my heart, I rent the veil of modesty, and stints not love to rend that veil, garing disgrace on grace to alight. The robe of sickness then I donned, but rent to rags was secrecy. Therefore my love and longing heart proclaim your high supremest might. The teardrop railing down my cheek telleth my tale of ignominy, and all the hid was seen by all, and all my riddle read aright. Heal then my malady, for thou art malady and remedy, but she whose cure is in thy hand shall ne'er be free of bane and blight. Burn me those eyne that radiance rain, slay me the swords of fantasy. How many hath the sword of love laid low their high degree despite? Yet will I never cease to pine, nor to oblivion will I flee. Love is my health, my faith, my joy, public and private, wrong or right. O happy eyes that sight thy charms, that gaze upon thee at their degree. Yea, of thy purest wish and will, the slave of love I'll aye be hight. When the damsel heard this elegy in quatrains, she cried out, Alas! Alas! and rent her garment, and fell to the ground fainting. And the Caliph saw scars of the palm rod on her back, and welts of the whip, and marvelled with exceeding wonder. Then the portress arose, and sprinkled water on her, and brought her a fresh and very fine dress, and put it on her. But when the company beheld these doings, their minds were troubled, for they had no inkling of the case, nor knew the story thereof. So the Caliph said to Ja'afar, Didst thou not see the scars upon the damsel's body? I cannot keep silent, or be at rest till I learn the truth of her condition, and the story of this other maiden, and the secret of the two black bitches. But Ja'afar answered, O our lord, they made it a condition with us that we speak not of what concerneth us not, lest we come to hear what pleaseth us not. Then said the portress, By Allah, O my sister, come to me and complete this service for me. Replied the procuratrix, With joy and goodly gree. So she took the lute and leaned it against her breasts, and swept the strings with her fingertips, and began singing. Give back mine eyes their sleep long ravished, and say me whither be my reason fled. I learnt that lending to thy love a place, sleep to mine eyelids mortal foe was made. They said, We held thee righteous who waylaid thy soul. Go ask his glorious eyes, I said. I pardon all my blood he pleased to spill, owning his troubles drove him blood to shed. On my mind's mirror sun-like sheen he cast, whose keen reflection fire in vitals bred. Waters of life let Allah waste at will, suffice my wage those lips of dewy red. And thou address my love, thou'lt find a cause for plaint and tears, or ruth, or lust ahead. In water pure his form shall greet your eyne, when fails the bowl, nor need ye drink of wine. Then she quoted from the same ode, I drank but the draught of his glance, not wine, and his swaying gait swayed to sleep these eyne. 'Twas not grape juice grips me, but grasp of past. 'Twas not bowl or bold me, but gifts divine. His coiling curl lets my soul ennetted, and his cruel will all my wits outwitted. After a pause, she resumed, If we plain of absence, what shall we say? Or if pain afflict us, where wend our way? And I hire a truckman to tell my tale, the lover's plaint is not told for pay. If I put on patience a lover's life, after loss of love will not last a day. Naught is left me now but regret, repine, and tears flooding cheeks for ever and aye. O thou who the babies of these eyes hast fled, thou art homed in heart that shall never stray. Would heaven, I wot, hast thou kept our pack, long a stream shall flow, to have firmest fay? Or hast forgotten the weeping slave, whom groans afflict, and whom griefs waylay? Ah, when severance ends, and we side by side couch, I'll blame thy rigours and chide thy pride. Now when the portress heard her second ode, she shrieked aloud and said, By Allah, 'tis right good! And laying her hands on her garments, tore them, as she did the first time, and fell to the ground fainting. Whereupon the procuratrix rose and brought her a second change of clothes after she had sprinkled water on her. She recovered and sat upright, and said to her sister, the cateress, Onwards, and help me in my duty, for there remains but this one song. So the provisioneress again brought out the lute and began to sing these verses. How long shall last, how long this rigour rife of woe? May not suffice thee all these tears thou seest flow? Our parting thus with purpose fell thou dost prolong, is't not enough to glad the heart of envious foe? Were but this lying world once true to lover heart, had not watched the weary night in tears of woe, O pity me, whom overwhelmed thy cruel will, my lord, my king, 'tis time some ruth to me thou show. To whom reveal my wrongs, O thou who murdered me? Sad, who of broken troth the pangs must undergo, increase wild love for thee, and frenzy hour by hour, and days of exile minute by so long, so slow. O Moslems, claim vendetta for this slave of love, whose sleep love ever wastes, whose patient love lays low. Doth law of love allow thee, O my wish, to lie lapped in another's arms, and unto me cry, Go? Yet in thy presence say, what joys shall I enjoy, when he I love but works my love to overflow? When the portress heard the third song, she cried aloud, and laying hands on her garments, rent them down to the very skirt, and fell to the ground fainting a third time, again showing the scars of the scourge. Then said the three Kalandars, Would heaven we had never entered this house, but had rather righted on the mounds and heaps outside the city, for verily our visit hath been troubled by sights which cut to the heart. The Caliph turned to them and asked, Why so? And they made answer, Our minds are sore troubled by this matter. Quoth the Caliph, Are ye not of the household? And quoth they, No, nor indeed did we ever set eyes on the place till within this hour. Hereat the Caliph marvelled and rejoined, This man who sitteth by you, would he not know the secret of the matter? And so saying, he winked and made signs at the porter. So they questioned the man, but he replied, By the all-might of Allah, in love all are alike. I am the growth of Baghdad, yet never in my born days did I darken these doors till today, and my companying with them was a curious matter. By Allah, they rejoined, we took thee for one of them, and now we see thou art one like ourselves. Then said the Caliph, We be 7 men, and they only 3 women, without even a fourth to help them. So let us question them of their case, and if they answer us not, fain we will be answered by force. All of them agreed to this except Ja'far, who said, This is not my recking, let them be, for we are their guests, and as ye know, they made a compact and condition with us, which we accepted and promised to keep. Wherefore it is better that we be silent concerning this matter, and as but little of the night remaineth, let each and every of us gang his own gate. Then he winked at the Caliph and whispered to him, There is but 1 hour of darkness left, and I can bring them before thee tomorrow, when thou canst freely question them all concerning their story. But the Caliph raised his head haughtily and cried out at him in wrath, saying, I have no patience left for my longings to hear of them. Let the Kalandars question them forthright. Quoth Ja'far, This is not my rede. Then words ran high, and talk answered talk, and they disputed as to who should first put the question. But at last all fixed upon the porter. And as the jingle increased, the house mistress could not but notice it, and asked them, O ye folk, on what matter are ye talking so loudly? Then the porter stood up respectfully before her, and said, O my lady, this company earnestly desire that thou acquaint them with the story of the two bitches, and what maketh thee punish them so cruelly. And then thou fallest to weeping over them and kissing them. And lastly they want to hear the tale of thy sister, and why she hath been bastinadoed with palm pricks like a man. These are the questions they charge me to put, and peace be with thee. Thereupon quoth she who was the lady of the house to the guests, Is this true that he saith on your part? And all replied, Yes, save Ja'afar, who kept silence. When she heard these words, she cried, By Allah, ye have wronged us, O our guests, with grievous wronging. For when you came before us, we made compact and condition with you, that whoso should speak of what concerneth him not, should hear what pleaseth him not. Sufficeth ye not that we took you into our house and fed you with our best food? But the fault is not so much yours as hers who let you in. Then she tucked up her sleeves from her wrists, and struck the floor thrice with her hand, saying, Come ye quickly. And lo, a closet door opened, and out of it came 7 negro slaves with drawn swords in hand, to whom she said, Pinion me those praters' elbows, and bind them each to each. They did her bidding, and asked her, O veiled and virtuous, is it thy high command that we strike off their heads? But she answered, Leave them a while, that I question them of their condition before their necks feel the sword. By Allah, O my lady, cried the porter, slay me not for others' sin. All these men offended and deserve the penalty of crime, save myself. Now by Allah, our night had been charming, had we escaped the mortification of those monocular calendars, whose entrance into a populous city would convert it into a howling wilderness. Then he repeated these verses, How fair is Ruth the strong man deigns not smother, and fairest fair when shown to weakest brother. By love's own holy tie between us twain, let one not suffer for the sin of other. When the porter ended his verse, the lady laughed, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 11th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the lady, after laughing at the porter, despite her wrath, came up to the party and spake thus, Tell me who ye be, for ye have but an hour of life. And were ye not men of rank, and perhaps notables of your tribes, you had not been so froward, and I had hastened your doom. Then said the Caliph, Woe to thee, O Ja'afar! Tell her who we are, lest we be slain by mistake, and speak her fair before some horror befall us. 'Tis part of thy deserts, replied he, whereupon the Caliph cried out at him, saying, There is a time for witty words, and there is a time for serious work. Then the lady accosted the 3 calendars and asked them, Are ye brothers? And they answered, No, by Allah, we be naught but fakirs and foreigners. Then quoth she to one among them, Wast thou born blind of one eye? And quoth he, No, by Allah, 'twas a marvellous matter and a wondrous mischance which caused my eye to be torn out, and mine is a tale which, if it were written upon the eye corners with needle gravers, were a warner to whoso would be warned. She questioned the 2nd and 3rd calendar, but all replied like the first, By Allah, O our mistress, each one of us cometh from a different country, and we are all 3 the sons of kings, sovereign princes ruling over suzerains and capital cities. Thereupon she turned towards them and said, Let each and every one of you tell me his tale in due order, and explain the cause of his coming to our place. And if his story please us, let him stroke his head and wend his way. The first to come forward was Hamal, the porter, who said, O my lady, I am a man and a porter. This dame, the cateress, hired me to carry a load, and took me first to the shop of a vintner, then to the booth of a butcher, thence to the stall of a fruiterer, thence to a grocer who also sold dry fruits, thence to a confectioner and a perfumer cum druggist, and from him to this place where there happened to me with you what happened. Such is my story, and peace be on us all. At this the lady laughed and said, Rub thy head and wend thy ways. But he cried, By Allah, I will not stump it till I hear the stories of my companions. Then came forward one of the monoculars and began to tell her. The First Calendar's Tale. Know, O my lady, what the cause of my beard being shorn and my eye being torn was as follows. My father was a king, and he had a brother who was a king over another city. And it came to pass that I and my cousin, the son of my paternal uncle, were both born on one and the same day. And the years and days rolled on. And as we grew up, I used to visit my uncle every now and then, and to spend a certain number of months with him. Now my cousin and I were sworn friends, for he ever treated me with exceeding kindness. He killed for me the fattest sheep, and strained the best of his wines, and we enjoyed long conversing and carousing. One day, when the wine had gotten the better of us, the son of my uncle said to me, O my cousin, I have a great service to ask of thee, and I desire that thou stay me not in whatso I desire to do. And I replied, With joy and goodly will. Then he made me swear the most binding oaths and left me. But after a little while he returned, leading a lady veiled and richly apparelled with ornaments worth a large sum of money. Presently he turned to me, the woman being still behind him, and said, Take this lady with thee, and go before me to such a burial ground, describing it so that I knew the place, and enter with her into such a sepulchre, and there await my coming. The oaths I swore to him made me keep silence, and suffered me not to oppose him. So I led the woman to the cemetery, and both I and she took our seats in the sepulchre. And hardly had we sat down, when in came my uncle's son with a bowl of water, a bag of mortar, and an adze somewhat like a hoe. He went straight to the tomb in the midst of the sepulchre, and breaking it open with the adze, set the stones on one side. Then he fell to digging into the earth of the tomb, till he came upon a large iron plate the size of a wicket door. And on raising it there appeared below it a staircase vaulted and winding. Then he turned to the lady and said to her, Come now, and take thy final choice. She at once went down by the staircase and disappeared. Then quoth he to me, O son of my uncle, by way of completing thy kindness, when I shall have descended into this place, restore the trapdoor to where it was, and heap back the earth upon it as it lay before, and then of thy goodness mix this unslaked lime which is in the bag with this water which is in the bowl, and after building up the stones, plaster the outside, so that none looking upon it shall say, This is a new opening in an old tomb. For a whole year have I worked at this place, whereof none knoweth but Allah. And this is the need I have of thee. Presently adding, May Allah never bereave thy friends of thee, nor make them desolate by thine absence, O son of my uncle, O my dear cousin. And he went down the stairs and disappeared forever. When he was lost to sight, I replaced the iron plate and did all his bidding, till the tomb became as it was before, and I worked almost unconsciously, for my head was heated with wine. Returning to the palace of my uncle, I was told that he had gone forth a sporting and hunting, so I slept that night without seeing him, And when the morning dawned, I remembered the scenes of the past evening and what happened between me and my cousin. And I repented of having obeyed him when penitence was of no avail. I still thought, however, that it was a dream. So I fell to asking for the son of my uncle, but there was none to answer me concerning him. And I went out to the graveyard and the sepulchres, and sought for the tomb under which he was, but could not find it. And I ceased not wandering about from sepulchre to sepulchre, and tomb to tomb, all without success, till night set in. End of section 7 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night. Translated by Richard Burton. Recording by Father Zeile of Detroit, Michigan, October 2008. drzeile.net.
Section 8, Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Section 8. So I returned to the city, yet I could neither eat nor drink, my thoughts being engrossed with my cousin, for that I knew not what was become of him, and I grieved with exceeding grief, and passed another sorrowful night, watching until morning. Then I went a second time to the cemetery, pondering over what the son of mine uncle had done, and sorely repenting my hearkening to him, went round among all the tombs, but could not find the tomb I sought. I mourned over the past, and remained in my mourning 7 days, seeking the place, and ever missing the path. Then my torture of scruples grew upon me till I well nigh went mad, and I found no way to dispel my grief save travel and return to my father. So I set out and journeyed homeward, but as I was entering my father's capital, a crowd of rioters sprang upon me and pinioned me. I wondered thereat with all wonderment, seeing that I am the son of the Sultan, and these men were my father's subjects, and among them were some of my own slaves. A great fear fell upon me, and I said to my soul, Would heaven I knew what hath happened to my father. I questioned those that bound me of the cause of their doing, but they returned me no answer. However, after a while one of them said to me, and he had been a hired servant in our house, Fortune has been false to thy father. His troops betrayed him, and the wazir who slew him now reigneth in his stead, and we lay in wait to seize thee by the bidding of him. I was well nigh distraught, and felt ready to faint on hearing of my father's death, when they carried me off and placed me in the presence of the usurper. Now between me and him there was an olden grudge, the cause of which is this. I was fond of shooting with a stone bow, and it befell one day as I was standing on the terrace roof of the palace that a bird lighted on the top of the wazir's house, when he happened to be there. I shot at the bird and missed the mark, but I hit the wazir's eye, and knocked it out as fate and fortune decreed. Even so saith the poet, We tread the path where fate hath led, the path fate writ we fain must tread, and man in one land doomed to die, death nowhere else shall do him dead. And on the likewise saith another, Let fortune have her wanton way, take heart, and all her words obey, nor joy nor mourn at anything, for all things pass and no things stay. Now, when I knocked out the wazir's eye, he could not say a single word, for that my father was king of the city. But he hated me ever after, and dire was the grudge thus caused between us twain. So when I was set before him, hand bound and pinioned, he straightway gave orders for me to be beheaded. I asked, For what crime wilt thou put me to death? Whereupon he answered, What crime is greater than this? Pointing the while to the place where his eye had been. Quoth I, This I did by accident, not of malice prepense. And quoth he, If thou didst it by accident, I will do the like to thee with intention. Then he cried, Bring him forward. And they brought me up to him, when he thrust his finger into my left eye and gouged it out, whereupon I became one-eyed as ye see me. Then he bade bind me hand and foot, and put me into a chest, and said to the sworder, Take charge of this fellow, and go off with him to the waste lands about the city. Then draw thy scimitar and slay him, and leave him to feed the beasts and birds. So the headsman fared forth with me, and when he was in the midst of the desert, he took me out of the chest, and I with both hands pinioned and both feet fettered, and was about to bandage my eyes before striking off my head. But I wept with exceeding weeping until I had made him weep with me, and looking at him I began to recite these couplets. I deemed you coat a mail that should withstand the foeman's shafts, and you proved foeman's brand. I hoped your aidance in mine every chance, though fail my left to aid my dexter hand. Aloof you stand and hear the railers jibe, while rain their shafts on me the jiber band. But an ye will not guard me from my foes, stand clear and succour neither these nor those. And I also quoted, I deemed my brethren male of strongest steel, and so they were, from foes I fend my dart. I deemed their arrows surest of their aim, and so they were, when aiming at my heart. When the headsman heard my lines, he had been sworder to my sire, and he owed me a debt of gratitude. He cried, O my lord, what can I do, being but a slave under orders? Presently adding, Fly for thy life, and never more return to this land, or they will slay thee, and slay me with thee. Even as the poet said, Take thy life, and fly when as evil's threat. Let the ruined house tell its owner's fate. New land for the old thou shalt seek and find, but to find new life thou must not await. Strange that men should sit in the stead of shame, when Allah's world is so wide and great. And trust no other in matters grave, life itself must act for a life beset. Ne'er would prowl the lion with maned neck, did he reckon on aid or of others' wreck. Hardly believing my escape, I kissed his hand, and thought the loss of my eye a light matter in consideration of my escaping from being slain. I arrived at my uncle's capital, and, going in to him, told him of what had befallen my father and myself, whereat he wept with sore weeping, and said, Verily, thou addest grief to my grief, and woe to my woe, for thy cousin hath been missing these many days. I wot not what hath happened to him, and none can give me news of him. And he wept till he fainted. I sorrowed and condoled with him, and he would have applied certain medicaments to my eye, but he saw that it was become as a walnut with the shell empty. Then he said, O my son, better to lose eye and keep life. After that I could no longer remain silent about my cousin, who was his only son and one dearly loved, so I told him all that had happened. He rejoiced with extreme joyance to hear the news of his son, and said, Come now, and show me the tomb. But I replied, By Allah, O my uncle, I know not its place, though I sought it carefully full many times, yet could not find the site. However, I and my uncle went to the graveyard, and looked right and left, till at last I recognized the tomb, and we both rejoiced with exceeding joy. We entered the sepulchre, and loosened the earth about the grave. Then, upraising the trap-door, descended some 50 steps till we came to the foot of the staircase, when, lo! we were stopped by a blinding smoke. Thereupon my uncle said that saying, whose sayer shall never come to shame, There is no majesty, and there is no might, save in Allah, the glorious, the great. And we advanced till we suddenly came upon a saloon, whose floor was strewn with flour and grain, and provisions, and all manner of necessities. And in the midst of it stood a canopy sheltering a couch. Thereupon my uncle went up to the couch, and inspecting it found his son and the lady who had gone down with him into the tomb, lying in each other's embrace. But the twain had become black as charred soot. It was as if they had been cast into a pit of fire. When my uncle saw this spectacle, he spat in his son's face, and said, Thou hast thy deserts, O thou hog! This is thy judgment in the transitory world, and yet remaineth the judgment in the world to come, a durer and a more enduring. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of day, and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the 12th night, she continued, It has reached me, O auspicious king, that the Kalandar thus went on with his story before the lady and the Caliph of Jafar. My uncle struck his son with his slipper as he lay there in a black heap of coal. I marvelled at his hardness of heart, and grieving for my cousin and the lady, said, By Allah, O my uncle, calm down thy wrath. Dost thou not see that all my thoughts are occupied with this misfortune, And how sorrowful I am for what hath befallen thy son, and how horrible it is that naught of him remaineth but a black heap of charcoal? And is that not enough, but thou must smite him with thy slipper? Answered he, O son of my brother, this youth from his boyhood was madly in love with his own sister, and often I forbade him to her, saying to myself, They are but little ones. However, when they grew up, sin befell between them, and although I could hardly believe it, I confined him, and chided him, and threatened him with the severest threats. And the eunuchs and servants said to him, Beware of so foul a thing, which none before thee ever did, and which none after thee will ever do, and have a care lest thou be dishonoured and disgraced among the kings of the day, even to the end of time. And I added, Such a report as this will be spread abroad by caravans, and take heed not to give them cause to talk, or I will assuredly curse thee, and do thee to death. After that, I lodged them apart, and shut her up. But the accursed girl loved him with passionate love, for Satan had got the mastery of her as well as of him, and made their foul sin seem fair in their sight. Now when my son saw that I separated them, he secretly built his souterrain, and furnished it, and transported to it victuals, even as thou seest, and when I had gone out a-sporting, came here with his sister, and hid from me. Then his righteous judgment fell upon the twain, and consumed them with fire from heaven. And verily, the last judgment will deal them durer pains and more enduring. Then he wept, and I wept with him, and he looked at me and said, Thou art my son in his stead. And I bethought me a while of the world and of its chances, and how the Wazir had slain my father, and had taken his place, and had put out my eye, and how my cousin had come to his death by the strangest chance. And I wept again, and my uncle wept with me. Then we mounted the steps, and let down the iron plate, and heaped up the earth over it. And after restoring the tomb to its former condition, we returned to the palace. But hardly had we sat down ere we heard the tom-tomming of the kettle-drum, and the tan-ta-ra of trumpets, and the clash of cymbals, and the rattling of war-men's lances, and the clamours of assailants, and the clanking of bits, and the neighing of steeds, while the world was canopied in dense dust and sand-clouds raised by the horses' hoofs. We were amazed at the sight and sound, knowing not what could be the matter, so we asked, and were told us that the Wazir who usurped my father's kingdom had marched his men, and that after levying his soldiery, and taking a host of wild Arabs into his service, he had come down upon us with armies like the sands of the sea, their number none could tell, and against them none could prevail. They attacked the city unawares, and the citizens, being powerless to oppose them, surrendered the place. My uncle was slain, and I made for the suburbs, saying to myself, If thou fall into this villain's hands, he will assuredly kill thee. On this wise all my troubles were renewed. And I pondered all that had betided my father and my uncle, and I knew not what to do, for if the city people or my father's troops had recognized me, they would have done their best to win favour by destroying me, and I could think of no way to escape save by shaving off my beard and my eyebrows. So I shore them off, and changing my fine clothes for a kalandar's rags, I fared forth from my uncle's capital, and made for this city, hoping that peradventure someone would assist me to the presence of the Prince of the Faithful, and the Caliph who is a vicegerent of Allah upon earth. Thus I come hither that I might tell him my tale and lay my case before him. I arrived here this very night, and was standing in doubt whither I should go, when suddenly I saw this second kalandar. So I salaamed to him, saying, I am a stranger. And he answered, I too am a stranger. And as we were conversing, up came our third companion, this third kalandar, who saluted us, saying, I am a stranger. And we answered, We too be strangers. Then we three walked on, and together, till darkness overtook us, and destiny drave us to your house. Such then is the cause of the shaving of my beard and mustachios and eyebrows, and the manner of my losing my right eye. They marvelled much at this tale, and the Caliph said to Ja'afar, By Allah, I have not seen nor have I heard the like of what hath happened to this kalandar. Quoth the lady of the house, Rub thy head and wend thy ways. But he replied, I will not go till I hear the history of the two others. Thereupon the second kalandar came forward, and kissing the ground, began to tell the second kalandar's tale. The second kalandar's tale. Know, O my lady, that I was not born one-eyed, and mine is a strange story, and it were graven with needle-graver on the eye corners, it were a warner to whoso would be warned. I am a king, son of a king, and was brought up like a prince. I learned intoning of the Koran according to the 7 schools. And I read all manner books, and held disputation on their contents with the doctors and men of science. Moreover, I studied star lore and the fair sayings of the poets, and I exercised myself in all branches of learning until I surpassed the people of my time. My skill in calligraphy exceeded that of all the scribes, and my fame was bruited abroad over all climes and cities, and all the kings learned to know my name. Amongst others, the king of Hind heard of me, and sent to my father to invite me to his court, with offerings and presents and rarities such as befit royalties. So my father fitted out 6 ships for me and my people, and we put to sea and sailed for the space of a full month, till we made the land. Then we brought out the horses that were with us in the ships, and, after loading the camels with our presents for the prince, set forth inland. But we had marched only a little way, when behold, a dust cloud flew up, and grew until it walled the horizon from view. After an hour or so, the veil lifted, and discovered beneath it 50 horsemen, ravening lions to the sight, in steel armor dight. We observed them straightly, and lo, they were cutters off of the highway, wild as wild Arabs. When they saw that we were only 4, and had with us but the 10 camels, carrying the presents, they dashed down upon us with lances at rest. We signed to them with our fingers, as it were, saying, We be messengers of the great king of Hind, so harm us not. But they answered on like wise, We are not in his dominions to obey, nor are we subject to his sway. Then they set upon us and slew some of my slaves, and put the lave to flight. And I also fled after I had gotten a wound, a grievous hurt, whilst the Arabs were taken up with the money and the presents which were with us. I went forth unknowing whither I went, having become mean as I was mighty, and fared on until I came to the crest of a mountain, where I took shelter for the night in a cave. When day arose I set out again, nor ceased after this fashion till I arrived at a fair city, and a well filled. Now it was a season when winter was turning away with his rime, and to greet the world with his flowers came prime, and the young blooms were springing, and the streams flowed ringing, and the birds were sweetly singing, as saith the poet concerning a certain city when describing it. A place secure from every thought of fear, safety and peace for ever lord it here. Its beauties seem to beautify its sons, as in heaven its happy folk appear. I was glad of my arrival, for I was wearied with the way, and yellow of face for weakness and want. But my plight was pitiable, and I knew not whither to betake me. So I accosted a tailor sitting in his little shop, and saluted him, and he returned my salam, and bade me kindly welcome, and wished me well, and entreated me gently, and asked me of the cause of my strangerhood. I told him all my past from first to last, and he was concerned on my account, and said, O youth, disclose not thy secret to any. The king of this city is the greatest enemy thy father hath, and there is blood wit between them, and thou hast cause to fear for thy life. Then he set meat and drink before me, and I ate and drank, and he with me, and we conversed freely till nightfall, when he cleared me a place in a corner of his shop, and brought me a carpet and a coverlet. I tarried with him 3 days, at the end of which time he said to me, Knowest thou no calling whereby to win thy living, O my son? I am learned in the law, I replied, and a doctor of doctrine, an adept in art and science, a mathematician, and a notable penman. He rejoined, Thy calling is of no account in our city, where not a soul understandeth science, or even writing, or aught save money-making. Then said I, By Allah, I know nothing but what I have mentioned. And he answered, Gird thy middle, and take thee a hatchet and a cord, and go and hew wood in the wold for thy daily bread, till Allah send thee relief, and tell none who thou art, lest they slay thee. Then he bought me an axe and a rope, and gave me in charge to certain woodcutters. And with these guardians I went forth into the forest, where I cut fuel wood the whole of my day, and came back in the evening bearing my bundle on my head. I sold it for 1/2 dinar, with part of which I bought provision and laid by the rest. In such work I spent a whole year, and when this was ended I went out one day, as was my wont, into the wilderness, and wandering away from my companions, I chanced upon a thickly grown lowland, in which there was an abundance of wood. So I entered, and found the gnarled stump of a great tree, and loosened the ground around it, and shovelled away the earth. Presently my hatchet rang upon a copper ring. So I cleared away the soil, and behold, the ring was attached to a wooden trap-door. This I raised, and there appeared beneath it a staircase. I descended the steps to the bottom, and came to a door, which I opened, and found myself in a noble hall, strong of structure, and beautifully built, where was a damsel like a pearl of great price, whose favour banished from my heart all grief and cark and care, and whose soft speech healed the soul in despair, and captivated the wise and ware. Her figure measured 5 feet in height, her breasts were firm and upright, her cheek a very garden of delight, her colour lively bright, her face gleamed like dawn through curly tresses, which gloomed like night, and above the snows of her bosom glittered teeth of pearly white. As the poet said of one like her, slim-waisted, loveling jetty hair encrowned, a wand of willow on a sandy mound. And as saith another, 4 things that meet not, save they here unite, to shed my heart blood and to rape my sprite. Brilliantest forehead, tresses jetty bright, cheeks rosy red, and stature beauty dight. When I looked upon her, I prostrated myself before him who had created her, for the beauty and loveliness he had shaped in her. And she looked at me, and said, Art thou man or Jinni? I am man, answered I. And she, Now who brought thee to this place, where I have abided 25 years, without even yet seeing man in it? Quoth I, and indeed I found her words wonder sweet, and my heart was melted to the core by them. O my lady, my good fortune led me hither, for the dispelling of my cark and care. Then I related to her all my mishap, from first to last, and my case appeared to her exceeding grievous. So she wept, and said, I will tell thee my story in my turn. I am the daughter of the king Ifitamus, lord of the islands of Abnus, who married me to my cousin, the son of my paternal uncle. But on my wedding night came an Ifrit, named Girgis bin Rajmus, first cousin, that is, mother's sister's son, of Iblis the foul fiend, snatched me up, and flying away with me like a bird, set me down in this place, whither he conveyed all I needed of fine stuffs, raiment, and jewels, and furniture, and meat, and drink, and other else. Once in every 10 years he comes here, and lies a single night with me, and then wends his way, for he took me without the consent of his family, and he hath agreed with me that if ever I need him by night or by day, I have only to pass my hand over yon 2 lines engraved upon the alcove, and he will appear to me before my fingers cease touching. 4 days have now passed since he was here, and, as there remain 6 days more before he come again, say me, wilt thou abide with me 5 days, and go hence the day before his coming? I replied, Yes, and yes again. O rare if all this be not a dream! Hereat she was glad, and springing to her feet, seized my hand, and carried me through an arched doorway to a hammam bath, a fair hall and richly decorate. I doffed my clothes, and she doffed hers, and we bathed, and she washed me. And when this was done, we left the bath, and she seated me by her side upon a high divan, and brought me sherbet scented with musk. When we felt cool after the bath, she set food before me, and we ate, and fell to talking. But presently she said to me, Lay thee down and take thy rest, for surely thou must be weary. So I thanked her, my lady, and lay down and slept soundly, forgetting all that had happened to me. When I awoke, I found her rubbing and shampooing my feet. So I again thanked her, and blessed her, and we sat for a while talking. Said she, By Allah, I was sad at heart, for I have dwelt alone underground these 25 years, and praise be to Allah, who has sent me someone with whom I can converse. Then she asked, O youth, what sayest thou to wine? And I answered, Do as thou wilt. Whereupon she went to a cupboard, and took out a sealed flask of right old wine, and set off the table with flowers and scented herbs, and began to sing these lines. Had we known of thy coming, we fain had dispread the cores of our hearts and the balls of our eyes, our cheeks as a carpet to greet thee had thrown, and our eyelids had strown for thy feet to betread. Now when she had finished her verse, I thanked her, for indeed love of her had gotten hold of my heart, and my grief and anguish were gone. We sat at converse and carousel till nightfall, and with her I spent the night. Such night never spent I in all my life. On the morrow, delight followed delight till midday, by which time I had drunken wine so freely that I had lost my wits, and stood up, staggering to the right and to the left, and said, Come, O my charmer, and I will carry thee up from this underground vault, and deliver thee from the spell of thy Jinni. She laughed and replied, content thee, and hold thy peace. Of every 10 days, 1 is for the Ifrit, and the other 9 are thine. Quoth I, and in good sooth drink had gotten the better of me, this very instant I will break down the alcove wherein is graven the talisman, and summon the Ifrit, that I may slay him, for it is a practice of mine to slay Ifrits. When she heard my words, her colour waxed wan, and she said, By Allah, do not! And she began repeating, This is a thing wherein destruction lies. I rede thee shun it, and thy wits be wise. And these also, O thou who seekest severance, draw the rein of thy swift steed, nor seek o'er much to advance. Ah, stay, for treachery is the rule of life, and sweets of meeting end in severance. I heard her verse, but paid no heed to her words. Nay, I raised my foot, and administered to the alcove a mighty kick. And Scheherazade perceived the dawn of day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 13th night, she said, It had reached me, O auspicious king, that the second calendar thus continued his tale to the lady. But when, O my mistress, I kicked that alcove with a mighty kick, behold, the air starkened and darkened, and thundered and lightened, the earth trembled and quaked, and the world became invisible. At once the fumes of wine left my head, and I cried to her, What is the matter? And she replied, The Ifrit is upon us. Did I not warn thee of this? By Allah, thou hast brought ruin upon me, but fly for thy life, and go up by the way thou camest down. So I fled up the staircase, but in the excess of my fear I forgot sandals and hatchet, and when I mounted 2 steps I turned to look for them, and lo, I saw the earth cleave asunder, and there rose from it an Ifrit, a monster of hideousness, who said to the damsel, What trouble and posture be this wherewith thou disturbest me? What mishap hath betided thee? No mishap hath befallen me, she answered, save that my breast was straitened, and my heart heavy with sadness. So I drank a little wine to broaden it, and to hearten myself. Then I rose to obey a call of nature, but the wine had gotten into my head, and I fell against the alcove. Thou liest like the whore thou art, shrieked the Ifrit. And he looked around the hall, right and left, till he caught sight of my axe and sandals, and said to her, What be these but the belongings of some mortal who hath been in thy society? She answered, I never set eyes upon them till this moment. They must have been brought by thee thither, cleaving to thy garments. Quoth the Ifrit, These words are absurd, thou harlot, thou strumpet. Then he stripped her stark naked, and, stretching her upon the floor, bound her hands and feet to 4 stakes, like one crucified, and set about torturing and trying to make her confess. I could not bear to stand listening to her cries and groans, so I climbed the stair on the quake with fear. And when I reached the top, I replaced the trap-door and covered it with earth. Then I repented of what I had done, with penitence exceeding, and thought of the lady, and her beauty and loveliness, and the tortures she was suffering at the hands of the accursed Ifrit, after her quiet life of 25 years, and how all that had happened to her was for the cause of me. I bethought me of my father, and his kingly estate, and how I had become a woodcutter, and how, after my time had been a while serene, the world had again waxed turbid and troubled to me. So I wept bitterly, and repeated this couplet, What time fate's tyranny shall most oppress thee, prepend, one day shall joy thee, one distress thee. Then I walked till I reached the home of my friend the tailor, whom I found most anxiously expecting me. Indeed he was, as the saying goes, on coals of fire for my account. And when he saw me, he said, All night long my heart hath been heavy, fearing for thee from wild beasts or other mischances. Now praise be to Allah for thy safety. I thanked him for his friendly solicitude, and retiring to my corner sat pondering and musing on what had befallen me. And I blamed and chided myself for my meddlesome folly and my forwardness in kicking the alcove. I was calling myself to account, when behold, my friend the tailor came to me, and said, O youth, in the shop there is an old man, a Persian, who seeketh thee. He hath thy hatchet and thy sandals, which he had taken to the woodcutter, saying, I was going out at what time the muezzin began to call the dawn prayer, when I chanced upon these things, and know not whose they are. So direct me to their owner. The woodcutters recognized thy hatchet, and directed him to thee. He is sitting in my shop. So fare forth to him, and thank him, and take thine axe and sandals. When I heard these words, I turned yellow with fear, and felt stunned as by a blow. And before I could recover myself, lo, the floor of my private room clove asunder, and out of it rose the Persian, who was the Ifrit. He had tortured the lady with exceeding tortures. Natheless she would not confess to him aught. So he took the hatchet and sandals, and said to her, As surely as I am Jurgis, of the seed of Iblis, I will bring thee back the owner of this and these. Then he went to the woodcutters with the presents aforesaid, and, being directed to me, after waiting a while in the shop till the fact was confirmed, he suddenly snatched me up, as a hawk snatcheth a mouse, and drew high in air, but presently descended and plunged with me under the earth, I being aswoon the while, and lastly set me down in the subterranean palace wherein I had passed that blissful night. And there I saw the lady, stripped to the skin, her limbs bound to 4 stakes, and blood welling from her sides. At the sight my eyes ran over with tears, but the Ifrit covered her person and said, O wanton, is this man not thy lover? She looked upon me and replied, I wot him not, nor have I ever seen him before this hour. Quoth the Ifrit, What? This torture and yet no confessing? And quoth she, I never saw this man in my born days. It is not lawful in Allah's sight to tell lies on him. If thou know him not, said the Ifrit to her, take this sword and strike off his head. She hent the sword in hand, and came close up to me. And I signalled to her with my eyebrows, my tears the while flowing adown my cheeks. She understood me, and made answer, also by signs, How couldst thou bring all this evil upon me? And I rejoined after the same fashion, This is a time for mercy and forgiveness. And the mute tongue of my case spake aloud, saying, Mine eyes were dragomans of my tongue betted, and told full clear the love I fain would hide. When last we met, the tears in torrents railed, for tongue struck dumb my glances testified. She signed with eye-glance, while her lips were mute. I signed with fingers, and she kenned the implied. Our eyebrows did all duty twixt us twain, and being speechless, love spake loud and plain. Then, O my mistress, the lady threw away the sword, and said, How shall I strike the neck of one I wot not? And who hath done me no evil? Such deed were not lawful in my law. And she held her hand. Said the Ifrit, 'Tis grievous to thee to slay thy lover, and because he hath lain with thee, thou endurest these torments, and obstinately refuseth to confess. After this it is clear to me, that only like loveth and pitieth like. And he turned to me and asked me, O man, haply thou also dost not know this woman. Whereto I answered, And pray who may she be? Assuredly I never saw her till this instant. Then take the sword, said he, and strike off her head, and I will believe that thou wottest her not, and I will leave thee free to go, and will not deaf hardly with thee. I replied, That I will do, and, taking the sword, went sharply forward and raised my hand to smite. But she signed to me with her eyebrows. And is it thus that thou requirest me? I understood what her looks implied, and answered her with an eye-glance, I will sacrifice my soul for thee. And the tongue of the case wrote in our hearts these lines. How many a lover with his eyebrows speaketh to his beloved as his passion pleadeth. With flashing eye his passion he inspireth, and well she seeth what kit's pleading needeth. How sweet the look, when on each other gazeth, and with what swiftness, and how sure it speedeth. And this with eyebrows all his passion writeth, and that with eyeballs all his passion readeth. Then my eyes filled with tears to overflowing, and I cast the sword from my hand, saying, O mighty Ifrit and hero, if a woman lacking wits and faith deem it unlawful to strike off my head, how can it be lawful for me, a man, to smite her neck, whom I never saw in my whole life? I cannot do such misdeed, though thou cause me drink the cup of death and perdition. Then said the Ifrit, Ye twain show the good understanding between you, but I will let you see how such doings end. Then he took the sword, and struck off the lady's hands first with 4 strokes, and then her feet, while I looked on, and made sure of death, and she farewelled me with her dying eyes. So the Ifrit cried at her, Thou warrest, and makest me a wittol with thine eyes, and struck her so that her head went flying. Then he turned to me and said, O mortal, we have it in our law, that, when the wife committeth adultery, it is lawful for us to slay her. As for this damsel, I snatched her away on her bride night when she was a girl of 12, and she knew no one but myself. I used to come to her once every 10 days, and lie with her the night, under the semblance of a man, a Persian, and when I was well assured that she had cuckolded me, I slew her. But as for thee, I am not well satisfied that thou hast wronged me in her. Nevertheless, I must not let thee go unharmed. So ask a boon of me, and I will grant it. Then I rejoiced, O my lady, with exceeding joy, and said, What boon shall I crave of thee? He replied, Ask me this boon, into what shape I shall bewitch thee. Wilt thou be a dog, or an ass, or an ape?" I rejoined, and indeed I had hoped that mercy might be shown me, "By Allah, spare me! That Allah spare thee for sparing a Moslem and a man who never wronged thee!" And I humbled myself before him with exceeding humility, and remained standing in his presence, saying, "I am sore oppressed by circumstance." He replied, "Talk me no long talk. It is in my power to slay thee, but I give thee instead thy choice." Quoth I, "O thou Ifrit, it would befit thee to pardon me, even as the envied pardon the envier." Quoth he, "And how is that?" And I began to tell him the tale of the envier and the envied. End of Section 8 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night.
Section 9 of Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, Section 9. The Tale of the Envier and the Envied. They relate, O Ifrit, that in a certain city were two men who dwelt in adjoining houses, having a common party wall, and one of them envied the other and looked on him with an evil eye, and did his utmost endeavour to injure him. And albeit at all times he was jealous of his neighbour, his malice at last grew on him till he could hardly eat or enjoy the sweet pleasures of sleep. But the envied did nothing save prosper, and the more the other strove to injure him, the more he got and gained and throve. At last the malice of his neighbour and the man's constant endeavour to work him a harm came to his knowledge. So he said, "By Allah, God's earth is wide enough for its people," and, leaving the neighbourhood, he repaired to another city where he bought himself a piece of land, in which was a dried up draw well, old and in ruinous condition. Here he built him an oratory and, furnishing it with a few necessaries, took up his abode therein, and devoted himself to prayer and worshipping Allah Almighty. And fakirs and holy mendicants flocked to him from all quarters, and his fame went abroad through the city and that countryside. Presently the news reached his envious neighbour of what good fortune had befallen him, and how the city notables had become his disciples. So he travelled to the place and presented himself at the holy man's hermitage, and was met by the envied with welcome and greeting and all honour. Then quoth the envier, "I have a word to say to thee, and this is the cause of my faring hither, and I wish to give thee a piece of good news. So come with me to thy cell." Thereupon the envied arose and took the envier by the hand, and they went in to the inmost part of the hermitage. But the envier said, "Bid thy fakirs retire to their cells, or I will not tell thee what I have to say, save in secret where none may hear us." Accordingly the envied said to his fakirs, "Retire to your private cells," and, when all had done as he bade them, he set out with his visitor and walked a little way until the twain reached the ruinous old well. And as they stood upon the brink, the envier gave the envied a push, which tumbled him headlong into it, unseen of any. Whereupon he fared forth and went his ways, thinking to have had slain him. Now this well happened to be haunted by the Jann who, seeing the case, bore him up and let him down little by little, till he reached the bottom, when they seated him upon a large stone. Then one of them asked his fellows, "Wot ye who be this man?" And they answered, "Nay." "This man," continued the speaker, "is the envied hight who, flying from the envier, came to dwell in our city, and here founded this holy house, and he hath edified us by his litanies and his lections of the Koran. But the envier set out and journeyed till he rejoined him, and cunningly contrived to deceive him and cast him into the well where we now are. But the fame of this good man had this very night come to the Sultan of our city, who designed to visit him on the morrow on account of his daughter. "What aileth his daughter?" asked one, and another answered, "She is possessed of a spirit, for Maymun, son of Damdam, is madly in love with her. But if this pious man knew the remedy, her cure would be as easy as could be." Hereupon one of them inquired, "And what is the medicine?" And he replied, "The black tomcat which is with him in the oratory hath, on the end of his tail, a white spot, the size of a dirham. Let him pluck 7 white hairs from the spot, then let him fumigate her therewith, and the Marid will flee from her and not return. So she shall be sane for the rest of her life." All this took place, O Ifrit, within earshot of the envied, who listened readily. When dawn broke and morn arose in sheen and shone, the Fakirs went to seek the Shaykh, and found him climbing up the wall of the well, whereby he was magnified in their eyes. Then, knowing that naught save the black tomcat could supply him with the remedy required, he plucked the 7 tail hairs from the white spot and laid them by him. And hardly had the sun risen ere the Sultan entered the hermitage with the great lords of his estate, bidding the rest of his retinue to remain standing outside. The envied gave him a hearty welcome, and seating him by his side asked him, "Shall I tell thee the cause of thy coming?" The king answered, "Yes." He continued, "Thou hast come upon pretext of a visitation, but it is in thy heart to question me of thy daughter." Replied the king, "'Tis even so, O thou holy Shaykh." And the envied continued, "Send and fetch her, and I trust to heal her forthright, and such be the will of Allah." The king in great joy sent for his daughter, and they brought her pinioned and fettered. The envied made her sit down behind a curtain, and taking out the hairs fumigated her therewith. Whereupon that which was in her head cried out and departed from her. The girl was at once restored to her right mind, and veiling her face, said, "What hath happened, and who brought me hither?" The Sultan rejoiced with a joy that nothing could exceed, and kissed his daughter's eyes and the holy man's hand. Then, turning to his great lords, he asked, "How say ye? What fee deserveth he who hath made my daughter whole?" And all answered, "He deserveth her to wife." And the king said, "Ye speak sooth." So he married him to her, and the envied thus became son-in-law to the king. And after a little the Wazir died, and the king said, "Whom can I make minister in his stead?" "Thy son-in-law," replied the courtiers. So the envied became a Wazir, and after a while the Sultan also died, and the lieges said, "Whom shall we make king?" And all cried, "The Wazir." So the Wazir was forthright made Sultan, and he became king regnant, a true ruler of men. One day as he had mounted his horse and, in the eminence of his kinglihood, was riding amidst his emirs and wazirs and the grandees of his realm, his eye fell upon his old neighbour, the envier, who stood afoot on his path. So he turned to one of his ministers and said, "Bring hither that man and cause him no affright." The Wazir brought him, and the king said, "Give him 1,000 miskals of gold from the treasury, and load him 10 camels with goods for trade, and send him under escort to his own town." Then he bade his enemy farewell, and sent him away, and forbore to punish him for the many and great evils he had done. See, O Ifrit, the mercy of the envied to the envier, who had hated him from the beginning, and had borne him such bitter malice, and never met him without causing him trouble, and had driven him from house and home, and then had journeyed for the sole purpose of taking his life by throwing him into the well. Yet he did not requite his injurious dealing, but forgave him and was bountiful to him. Then I wept before him, O my lady, with sore weeping, never was there sorer, and I recited, "Pardon my fault, for 'tis the wise man's wont all faults to pardon and revenge forego. In sooth all manner faults in me contain, then deign of goodness mercy grace to show. Whoso imploreth pardon from on high should hold his hand from sinners here below. Said the Ifrit, lengthen not thy words. As to my slaying thee, fear it not, and as to my pardoning thee, hope it not. But from my bewitching thee there is no escape. Then he tore me from the ground which closed under my feet, and hew with me into the firmament, till I saw the earth as a large white cloud or a saucer in the midst of the waters. Presently he set me down on a mountain, and, taking a little dust, over which he muttered some magical words, sprinkled me therewith, saying, Quit that shape and take thou the shape of an ape. And on the instant I became an ape, a tailless baboon, the son of a century. Now when it left me and I saw myself in this ugly and hateful shape, I wept for myself, but resigned my soul to the tyranny of time and circumstance, well weeting that fortune is fair and constant to no man. I descended the mountain and found at the foot a desert plain, long and broad, over which I travelled for the space of a month, till my course brought me to the brink of the briny sea. After standing there a while, I was ware of a ship in the offing, which ran before a fair wind making for the shore. I hid myself behind a rock on the beach and waited till the ship drew near, when I leapt on board. I found her full of merchants and passengers, and one of them cried, "O Captain, this ill-omened brute will bring us ill luck." And another said, "Turn this ill-omened beast out from among us." The captain said, "Let us kill it." Another said, "Slay it with the sword." A third, "Drown it." And a fourth, "Shoot it with an arrow." But I sprang up and laid hold of the racer's skirt, and shed tears which poured down my chops. The captain took pity on me and said, "O merchants, this ape hath appealed to me for protection, and I will protect him. Henceforth he is under my charge, so let none do him aught hurt or harm, otherwise there will be bad blood between us." Then he entreated me kindly, and whatsoever he said I understood, and ministered to his every want, and served him as a servant, albeit my tongue would not obey my wishes, so that he came to love me. The vessel sailed on, the wind being fair, for the space of 50 days, at the end of which we cast anchor under the walls of a great city, wherein was a world of people, especially learned men, none could tell their number save Allah. No sooner had we arrived than we were visited by certain Mamluk officials from the king of that city, who, after boarding us, greeted the merchants and giving them joy of safe arrival, said, "Our king welcometh you, and sendeth you this roll of paper, whereupon each and every of you must write a line. For ye shall know that the king's minister, a calligrapher of renown, is dead, and the king hath sworn a solemn oath that he will make none Wazir in his stead who cannot write as well as he could." He then gave us the scroll, which measured 10 cubits long by a breadth of 1, and each of the merchants who knew how to write wrote a line thereon, even to the last of them. After which I stood up, still in the shape of an ape, and snatched the roll out of their hands. They feared lest I should tear it or throw it overboard, so they tried to stay me and scare me, but I signed to them that I could write, whereat all marvelled, saying, "We never yet saw an ape write." And the captain cried, "Let him write, and if he scribble and scrabble we will kick him out and kill him; but if he write fair and scholarly I will adopt him as my son, for surely I never yet saw a more intelligent and well-mannered monkey than he. Would heaven my real son were his match in morals and manners." I took the reed and, stretching out my paw, dipped it in ink and wrote, in the hand used for letters, these 2 couplets: "Time hath recorded gifts she gave the great, but none recorded thine which be far higher. Allah ne'er orphaned men by loss of thee who be of goodness mother, bounty's sire." And I wrote in Rayhani, or larger letters elegantly curved: "Thou hast a reed of reed to every land, whose driving causeth all the world to thrive. Nil is the Nile of Misraim by thy boons, who makest misery's smile with fingers 5. Then I wrote in the soul's character, there be no writer who from death shall fleet, but what his hand hath writ man shall repeat. Write therefore naught save what shall serve thee when thou sees on Judgment Day, and so thou sees. Then I wrote in the character Nask, when to sore parting fate our love shall doom, to distant life by destiny decreed, we cause the inkhorn's lips to plain our pains, and tongue our utterance with the talking reed. And I wrote in the Tumar character, kingdom with none endures. If thou deny this truth, where be the kings of earlier earth? Set trees of goodliness while rule endures, and when thou art fallen they shall tell thy worth. And I wrote in the character Muhakkak, when oped the inkhorn of thy wealth and fame, take ink of generous heart and gracious hand, write brave and noble deeds while write thou can, and win thee praise from point of pen and brand. Then I gave the scroll to the officials, and, after we all had written our line, they carried it before the king. When he saw the paper, no writer pleased him save my writing, and he said to the assembled courtiers, go seek the writer of these lines and dress him in a splendid robe of honour. Then mount him on a she-mule, let a band of music precede him, and bring him to the presence. At these words they smiled, and the king was wroth with them and cried, O accursed! I give you an order and you laugh at me? O king, replied they, if we laugh, 'tis not at thee and not without a cause. And what is it? asked he, and they answered, O king, thou orderest us to bring to thy presence the man who wrote these lines. Now the truth is that he who wrote them is not of the sons of Adam, but an ape, a tailless baboon belonging to the ship captain. Quoth he, is this true that you say? Quoth they, yea, by the rights of thy munificence. The king marvelled at their words and shook with mirth and said, I am minded to buy this ape of the captain. Then he sent messengers to the ship with the mule, the dress, the guard and the state drums, saying, not the less do you clothe him in the robe of honour and mount him on the mule, and let him be surrounded by the guards and preceded by the band of music. They came to the ship and took me from the captain and robed me in the robe of honour and, mounting me on the she-mule, carried me in the state procession through the streets, whilst the people were amazed and amused. And folk said to one another, Halloo, is our Sultan about to make an ape his minister? And came all agog crowding to gaze at me, and the town was astir and turned topsy-turvy on my account. When they brought me up to the king and set me in his presence, I kissed the ground before him 3 times, and once before the High Chamberlain and great officers, and he bade me be seated, and I sat respectfully on shins and knees, and all who were present marvelled at my fine manners, and the king most of all. Thereupon he ordered the lieges to retire, and, when none remained save the king's majesty, the eunuch on duty and a little white slave, he bade them set before me the table of food, containing all manner of birds, whatever hoppeth and flieth and treadeth in nest, such as quail and sand-grouse. Then he signed me to eat with him, so I rose and kissed ground before him, then set me down and ate with him. And when the table was removed, I washed my hands in 7 waters, and took the reed case and reed, and wrote instead of speaking these couplets: Wail for the little partridges on porringer and plate, cry for the ruin of the fries and stews well marinate. Keen as I keen for loved lost daughters of the Kata grouse, and omelette round the fair and browned fowls agglomerate. O fire in heart of me for fish, those deux poissons I saw, bedded on new-made scones and cakes in piles to leniate. For thee, O vermicelli, aches my very maw. I hold without thee every taste and joy are clean annihilate. Those eggs have rolled their yellow eyes in torturing pains of fire, ere served with hash and fritters hot, that delicatest Kate. Praised be Allah for his baked and roast, and ah, how good this pulse, these potherbs steeped in oil with eisel combinate. When hunger sated was, I elbow-propped fell back upon meat pudding, wherein gleamed the bangles that my wits amazed. Then woke I sleeping appetite to eat as though in sport, sweets from burseated trays and kickshaws most elaborate. Be patient, soul of me, time is a haughty, jealous wight. To-day he seems dark lowering, and to-morrow fair to sight. Then I rose and seated myself at a respectful distance while the King read what I had written, and marvelled, exclaiming, "O the miracle, that an ape should be gifted with this graceful style and this power of penmanship! By Allah, 'tis a wonder of wonders!" Presently they set before the King choice wines in flagons of glass, and he drank. Then he passed on the cup to me, and I kissed the ground and drank and wrote on it, "With fire they boiled me to lose my tongue, and pain and patience gave for fellowship. Hence comes it, hands of men upbear me high, and honey dew from lips of maid I sip." And these also, "Morn set to night, withdraw and let me shine. So drain we draughts that dull all pain and pine. I doubt, so fine the glass, the wine so clear, if 'tis the wine in glass or glass in twine." The King read my verse and said with a sigh, "Were these gifts in a man, he would excel all the folk of his time and age." Then he called for the chess board and said, "Say, wilt thou play with me?" And I signed with my head, "Yes." Then I came forward and ordered the pieces and played with him 2 games, both of which I won. He was speechless with surprise. So I took the pen case and, drawing forth a reed, wrote on the board these 2 couplets: "Two hosts fare fighting through the livelong day, nor is their battling ever finished, until when darkness girdeth them about, the twain go sleeping in a single bed." The King read these lines with wonder and delight, and said to his eunuch, "O Mukbil, go to thy mistress Sitt al-Husn and say her, 'Come, speak the King who biddeth thee hither to take thy solace in seeing this right wondrous ape.'" So the eunuch went out and presently returned with the lady who, when she saw me, veiled her face and said, "O my father, hast thou lost all sense of honour? How cometh it thou art pleased to send for me and show me to strange men?" "O Sitt al-Husn," said he, "no man is here save this little foot page and the eunuch who reared thee, and I thy father. From whom, then, cost thou veil thy face?" She answered, "'Tis whom thou deemest an ape is a young man, a clever and polite, a wise and learned, and the son of a king; but he is ensorcelled, and the Ifrit Jirjaris, who is of the seed of Iblis, cast a spell upon him, after putting to death his own wife the daughter of King Ifitamus, lord of the islands of Abnus." The King marvelled at his daughter's words and, turning to me, said, "Is this true that she saith of thee?" And I signed by a nod of my head the answer, "Yea, verily," and wept sore. Then he asked his daughter, "Whence knewest thou that he is ensorcelled?" And she answered, "O my dear papa, there was with me in my childhood an old woman, a wily one and a wise, and a witch to boot, and she taught me the theory of magic and its practice, and I took notes in writing and therein waxed perfect, and have committed to memory 170 chapters of egromantic formulas, by the least of which I could transport the stones of thy city behind the mountain Kaf and the circumambient main, or make its site an abyss of the sea and its people fishes swimming in the midst of it." "O my daughter," said her father, "I conjure thee by my life disenchant this young man, that I may make him my Wazir and marry thee to him, for indeed he is an ingenious youth and a deeply learned." "With joy and goodly gree," she replied, and, handing in hand an iron knife whereon was inscribed the name of Allah in Hebrew characters, she described a wide circle. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the 14th Night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that the Kalandar continued his tale thus: O my lady, the King's daughter hand in hand a knife whereon were inscribed Hebrew characters, and described a wide circle in the midst of the palace hall, and therein wrote in Cufic letters mysterious names and talismans, and she uttered words and muttered charms, some of which we understood, and others we understood not. Presently the world waxed dark before our sight, till we thought that the sky was falling upon our heads, and lo! the Ifrit presented himself in his own shape and aspect. His hands were like many pronged pitchforks, his legs like the masts of great ships, and his eyes like cressets of gleaming fire. We were in terrible fear of him, but the king's daughter cried at him, "No welcome to thee and no greeting, O dog!" Whereupon he changed to the form of a lion and said, "O traitress, how is it thou hast broken the oath we sware that neither should contraire other?" "O accursed one," answered she, "how could there be a compact between me and the like of thee?" Then said he, "Take what thou hast brought on thyself." And the lion opened his jaws and rushed upon her. But she was too quick for him, and, plucking a hair from her head, waved it in the air, muttering over it the while, and the hair straightway became a trenchant sword blade, wherewith she smote the lion and cut him in twain. Then the two halves flew away in air, and the head changed to a scorpion, and the princess became a huge serpent and set upon the accursed scorpion, and the two fought, coiling and uncoiling, a stiff fight for an hour at least. Then the scorpion changed to a vulture, and the serpent became an eagle which set upon the vulture, and hunted him for an hour's time, till he became a black tomcat, which miauled and grinned and spat. Thereupon the eagle changed into a piebald wolf, and these two battled in the palace for a long time, when the cat, seeing himself overcome, changed into a worm and crept into a huge red pomegranate, which lay beside the jetting fountain in the midst of the palace hall. Whereupon the pomegranate swelled to the size of a watermelon in air, and, falling upon the marble pavement of the palace, broke to pieces, and all the grains fell out and were scattered about till they covered the whole floor. Then the wolf shook himself and became a snow-white cock, which fell to picking up the grains, purposing not to leave one. But by doom of destiny one seed rolled to the fountain edge and there lay hid. The cock fell to crowing and clapping his wings and signing to us with his beak as if to ask, "Are any grains left?" But we understood not what he meant, and he cried to us with so loud a cry that we thought the palace would fall upon us. Then he ran over all the floor till he saw the grain which had rolled to the fountain edge, and rushed eagerly to pick it up, when behold, it sprang into the midst of the water and became a fish, and dived to the bottom of the basin. Thereupon the cock changed to a big fish and plunged in after the other, and the two disappeared for a while. And lo! we heard loud shrieks and cries of pain which made us tremble. After this the Ifrit rose out of the water, and he was as a burning flame, casting fire and smoke from his mouth and eyes and nostrils. And immediately the princess likewise came forth from the basin, and she was one live coal of flaming low, and these two, she and he, battled for the space of an hour, until their fires entirely compassed them about, and their thick smoke filled the palace. As for us, we panted for breath, being well nigh suffocated, and we longed to plunge into the water, fearing lest we be burned up and utterly destroyed. And the king said, "There is no majesty and there is no might save in Allah, the Glorious, the Great. Verily we are Allah's, and unto Him are we returning. Would Heaven I had not urged my daughter to attempt the disenchantment of this ape fellow, whereby I have imposed upon her the terrible task of fighting yon accursed Ifrit, against whom all the Ifrits in the world could not prevail. And would Heaven we had never seen this ape, Allah never assain nor bless the day of his coming. We thought to do a good deed by him before the face of Allah, and to release him from enchantment, and now we have brought this trouble and travail upon our heart." But I, O my lady, was tongue-tied and powerless to say a word to him. Suddenly, ere we were ware of aught, the Ifrit yelled out from under the flames, and, coming up to us as we stood on the estrade, blew fire in our faces. The damsel overtook him and breathed blasts of fire at his face, and the sparks from her and from him rained down upon us, and her sparks did us no harm, but one of his sparks alighted upon my eye and destroyed it, making me a monocular ape. And another fell on the King's face, scorching the lower half, burning off his beard and mustachios and causing his under teeth to fall out, while a third alighted on the castrato's breast, killing him on the spot. So we despaired of life and made sure of death, when lo! a voice repeated the saying, Allah is most highest! Allah is most highest! Aidance and victory to all who the truth believe, and disappointment and disgrace to all who the religion of Mohammed, the moon of faith, unbelieve. The speaker was the princess who had burned the Ifrit, and he was become a heap of ashes. Then she came up to us and said, "Reach me a cup of water." They brought it to her, and she spoke over it words we understood not, and sprinkling me with it cried, "By virtue of the truth and by the most great name of Allah, I charge thee return to thy former shape." And behold, I shook and became a man as before, save that I had utterly lost an eye. Then she cried out, "The fire! The fire! O my dear papa, an arrow from the accursed hath wounded me to the death, for I am not used to fight with the Jann. Had he been a man I had slain him in the beginning. I had no trouble till the time when the pomegranate burst and the grains scattered, but I overlooked the seed wherein was the very life of the Jinni. Had I picked it up he had died on the spot, but as fate and fortune decreed I saw it not. So he came upon me all unawares, and there befell between him and me a sore struggle under the earth, and high in air, and in the water. And as often as I opened on him a gate, he opened on me another gate and a stronger, till at last he opened on me the gate of fire, and few are saved upon whom the door of fire openeth. But destiny willed that my cunning prevail over his cunning, and I burned him to death after I vainly exhorted him to embrace the religion of Al-Islam. As for me, I am a dead woman. Allah supply my place to you." Then she called upon heaven for help, and ceased not to implore relief from the fire, when lo! a black spark shot up from her robed feet to her thighs, then it flew to her bosom and thence to her face. When it reached her face she wept and said, "I testify that there is no God but the God, and that Mohammed is the Apostle of God." And we looked at her and saw naught but a heap of ashes by the side of the heap that had been the Ifrit. We mourned for her, and I wished I had been in her place. So had I not seen her lovely face who had worked me such weal become ashes. But there is no gainsaying the will of Allah. When the King saw his daughter's terrible death, he plucked out what was left of his beard and beat his face and rent his raiment, and I did as he did, and we both wept over her. Then came in the chamberlains and grandees and were amazed to find 2 heaps of ashes and the Sultan in a fainting fit. So they stood around him till he revived and told them what had befallen his daughter from the Ifrit, whereat their grief was right grievous, and the women and the slave girls shrieked and keened, and they continued their lamentations for the space of 7 days. Moreover, the King bade build over his daughter's ashes a vast vaulted tomb, and burn therein wax tapers and sepulchral lamps. But as for the Ifrit's ashes, they scattered them on the winds, speeding them to the curse of Allah. Then the Sultan fell sick of a sickness that well nigh brought him to his death for a month's space, and when health returned to him and his beard grew again and he had been converted by the mercy of Allah to Al-Islam, he sent for me and said, "O youth, fate had decreed for us the happiest of lives, safe from all the chances and changes of time, till thou camest to us, when troubles fell upon us. Would to Heaven we had never seen thee and the foul face of thee! For we took pity on thee, and thereby we have lost our all. I have on thy account first lost my daughter who to me was well worth 100 men. Secondly, I have suffered that which befell me by reason of the fire and the loss of my teeth, and my eunuch also was slain. I blame thee not, for it was out of thy power to prevent this. The doom of Allah was on thee as well as on us, and thanks be to the Almighty for that my daughter delivered thee, albeit thereby she lost her own life. Go forth now, O my son, from this my city, and suffice thee what hath befallen us through thee, even although 'twas decreed for us. Go forth in peace, and if I ever see thee again, I will surely slay thee." And he cried out at me. So I went forth from his presence, O my lady, weeping bitterly and hardly believing in my escape, and knowing not whither I should wend. And I recalled all that had befallen me, my meeting the tailor, my love for the damsel in the palace beneath the earth, and my narrow escape from the Ifrit, even after he had determined to do me die, and how I had entered the city as an ape, and was now leaving it a man once more. Then I gave thanks to Allah and said, "My eye and not my life," and, before leaving the place, I entered the bath and shaved my poll and beard and mustachios and eyebrows, and cast ashes on my head, and donned the coarse black woollen robe of a Kalandar. Then I fared forth, O my lady, and every day I pondered all the calamities which had betided me, and I wept and repeated these couplets: I am distraught, yet verily his ruth abides with me, though round me gather hosts of ills, whence come I cannot see. Patient I'll be till patience self with me impatient wax, patient for ever till the Lord fulfil my destiny. Patient I'll bide without complaint a wronged and vanquished man, patient as sun-parched white that spans the desert's sandy sea. Patient I'll be till Elohe's self unwittingly allow. I'm patient under bitterer things than bitterest Elohe. No bitterer things than Elohe's or than patience for mankind, yet bitterer than the twain to me were patience treachery. My sere and seamed and seared brow would dragoman my sore, if soul could search my sprite and their unsecret secrecy. Were hills to bear the load I bear, they'd crumble 'neath the weight. 'Twould still the roaring wind, 'twould quench the flame tongue's flagrancy. And whoso saith the world is sweet, certes a day he'll see with more than Elohe's bitterness and Elohe's pungency. Then I journeyed through many regions, and saw many a city, intending for Baghdad, that I might seek audience in the house of peace with the Commander of the Faithful, and tell him all that had befallen me. I arrived here this very night, and found my brother in Allah, this first Kalandar, standing about as one perplexed, so I saluted him with "Peace be upon thee," and entered into discourse with him. Presently up came our brother, this third Kalandar, and said to us, "Peace be with you, I am a stranger," whereto we replied, "And we too be strangers who have come hither this blessed night." So we all three walked on together, none of us knowing the other's history, till destiny drave us to this door and we came in to you. Such then is my story and my reason for shaving my beard and mustachios, and this is what caused the loss of my eye. Said the house mistress, "Thy tale is indeed a rare, so rub thy head and wend thy ways." But he replied, "I will not budge till I hear my companions' stories." Then came forward the third Kalandar and said, "O illustrious lady, my history is not like that of these my comrades, but more wondrous and far more marvellous. In their case fate and fortune came down on them unawares, but I drew down destiny upon my own head, and brought sorrow on mine own soul, and shaved my own beard, and lost my own eye. Hear then the third Kalandar's tale." End of section 9.
Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kalinda. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Section 10. The Third Kalandar's Tale. Know, O my lady, that I also am a king and the son of a king, and my name is Ajib, son of Kazib. When my father died, I succeeded him, and I ruled and did justice and dealt fairly by all my lieges. I delighted in sea trips, for my capital stood on the shore, before which the ocean stretched far and wide, and near at hand were many great islands with sconces and garrisons in the midst of the main. My fleet numbered 50 merchantmen, and as many yachts for pleasance, and 150 sail ready fitted for holy war with the unbelievers. It fortuned that I had a mind to enjoy myself on the islands aforesaid, so I took ship with my people in 10 keel, and carrying with me a month's victual, I set out on a 20 days' voyage. But one night a head wind struck us, and the sea rose against us with huge waves, and the billows sorely buffeted us, and a dense darkness settled round us. We gave ourselves up for lost. And I said, Whoso endangereth his days, e'en an he escape, deserveth no praise. Then we prayed to Allah and besought him. But the storm blasts ceased not to blow against us, nor the surges to strike us, till morning broke, when the gale fell, and the seas sank to mirrory stillness, and the sun shone upon us kindly clear. Presently we made an island where we landed, and cooked somewhat of food, and ate heartily, and took our rest for a couple of days. Then we set out again, and sailed other 20 days, the seas broadening and the land shrinking. Presently the current ran counter to us, and we found ourselves in strange waters, where the captain had lost his reckoning, and was wholly bewildered in this sea. So said we to the lookout man, Get thee to the masthead, and keep thine eyes open. He swarmed up the mast, and looked out, and cried aloud, O Rais! I espy to starboard something dark, very like a fish, floating on the face of the sea, and to larboard there is a loom in the midst of the main, now black and now bright. When the captain heard the lookout's words, he dashed his turban on the deck, and plucked out his beard, and beat his face, saying, Good news indeed! We be all dead men, not one of us can be saved. And he fell to weeping, and all of us wept for his weeping, and also for our lives. And I said, O captain, tell us what it is the lookout saw. O my prince, answered he, know that we lost our course in the night of the storm, which was followed on the morrow by a 2 days' calm, during which we made no way, and we have gone astray 11 days reckoning from that night, with ne'er a wind to bring us back to our true course. Tomorrow, by the end of the day, we shall come to a mountain of black stone, high as the Magnet Mountain. For thither the currents carry us willy-nilly. As soon as we are under its lee, the ship's sides will open, and every nail and plank will fly out and cleave fast to the mountain, for that Almighty Allah hath gifted the lodestone with a mysterious virtue and a love for iron, by reason whereof all which is iron travelleth towards it. And on this mountain is much iron, how much none knoweth save the Most High, from the many vessels which have been lost there since the days of yore. The bright spot upon its summit is a dome of yellow latten from Andalusia, vaulted upon 10 columns, and on its crown is a horseman who rideth a horse of brass, and holdeth in hand a lance of latten, and there hangeth on his bosom a tablet of lead, graven with names and talismans. And he presently added, And, O king, none destroyeth folk save the rider on that steed, nor will the egromancy be dispelled till he fall from his horse. Then, O my lady, the captain wept with exceeding weeping, and we all made sure of death doom, and each and every one of us farewelled his friend, and charged him with his last will and testament, in case he might be saved. We slept not that night, and in the morning we found ourselves much nearer the Lodestone Mountain, whither the waters crave us with a violent send. When the ships were close under its lee, they opened, and the nails flew out, and all the iron in them sought the Magnet Mountain, and clove to it like a network, so that by the end of the day we were all struggling in the waves round about the mountain. Some of us were saved, but more were drowned, and even those who had escaped knew not one another, so stupefied were they by the beating of the billows and the raving of the winds. As for me, O my lady, Allah, be his name exalted, preserved my life that I might suffer whatso he willed to me of hardship, misfortune, and calamity. For I scrambled upon a plank from one of the ships, and the wind and waters threw it at the feet of the mountain. There I found a practicable path leading by steps carven out of the rock to the summit, and I called on the name of Allah Almighty. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 15th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the 3rd calender said to the lady, the rest of the party sitting fast bound, and the slaves standing with swords drawn over their heads, And after calling on the names of Almighty Allah and passionately beseeching him, I breasted the ascent, clinging to the steps and notches hewn in the stone, and mounted little by little. and the Lord stilled the wind and aided me in the ascent, so that I succeeded in reaching the summit. There I found no resting place save the dome, which I entered, joying with exceeding joy at my escape, and made the wuzu ablution, and prayed a 2-bow prayer, a thanksgiving to God for my preservation. Then I fell asleep under the dome, and heard in my dream a mysterious voice saying, O son of Khazib, when thou wakest from thy sleep, dig under thy feet, and thou shalt find a bow of brass and 3 leaden arrows, inscribed with talismans and characts. Take the bow, and shoot the arrows at the horseman on the dome top, and free mankind from this sore calamity. When thou hast shot him, he shall fall into the sea, and the horse will also drop at thy feet. Then bury it in the place of the bow. This done, the main will swell and rise till it is level with the mountain head, and there will appear on it a skiff carrying a man of Latin, other than he thou shalt have shot, holding in his hand a pair of paddles. He will come to thee, and do thou embark with him, but beware of saying Bismillah, or of otherwise naming Allah Almighty. He will row thee for a space of 10 days, till he bring thee to certain islands called the Islands of Safety, and thence thou shalt easily reach a port, and find those who will convey thee to thy native land. And all this shall be fulfilled to thee, so thou call not on the name of Allah. Then I started up from my sleep in joy and gladness, and, hastening to do the bidding of the mysterious voice, found the bow and arrows, and shot at the horseman and tumbled him into the main, whilst the horse dropped at my feet. So I took it and buried it. Presently the sea surged up, and rose till it reached the top of the mountain, nor had I long to wait ere I saw a skiff in the offing coming towards me. I gave thanks to Allah, and when the skiff came up to me, I saw therein a man of brass, with a tablet of lead on his breast, inscribed with talismans and characts, and I embarked without uttering a word. The boatman rowed on with me through the first day, and the second, and the third, in all 10 whole days, till I caught sight of the Islands of Safety, whereat I joyed with exceeding joy, and for stress of gladness claimed, Allah, Allah, in the name of Allah, there is no God but the God, and Allah is Almighty. Thereupon the skiff forthwith upset, and cast me upon the sea. Then it righted, and sank deep into the depths. Now I am a fair swimmer, so I swam the whole day till nightfall, when my forearms and shoulders were numbed with fatigue, and I felt like to die. So I testified to my faith, expecting naught but death. The sea was still surging under the violence of the winds, and presently there came a billow like a hillock, and bearing me up high in air, threw me with a long cast on dry land, that his will might be fulfilled. I crawled up the beach, and doffing my raiment, wrung it out to dry, and spread it in the sunshine. Then I lay me down and slept the whole night. As soon as it was day, I donned my clothes, and rose to look whither I should walk. Presently I came to a thicket of low trees, and making a cast round it, found that the spot whereon I stood was an islet, a mere holm, girt on all sides by the ocean. Whereupon I said to myself, Whatso freeth me from one great calamity casteth me into a greater. But while I was pondering my case and longing for death, behold, I saw afar off a ship making for the island, so I clomb a tree, and hid myself among the branches. Presently the ship anchored, and landed 10 slaves, blackamoors, bearing iron hoes and baskets, who walked on till they reached the middle of the island. Here they dug deep into the ground, until they uncovered a plate of metal which they lifted, thereby opening a trap door. After this they returned to the ship, and thence brought bread and flour, honey and fruits, clarified butter, leather bottles containing liquors and many household stuffs, also furniture, table service, and mirrors, rugs, carpets, and in fact all needed to furnish a dwelling. And they kept going to and fro, and descending by the trap door, till they had transported into the dwelling all that was in the ship. After this the slaves again went on board, and brought back with them garments as rich as may be, and in the midst of them came an old man, of whom very little was left, for time had dealt hardly and harshly with him, and all that remained of him was a bone wrapped in a rag of blue stuff, through which the winds whistled west and east, as saith the poet of him, Time gars me tremble, ah how sore the balk, while time in pride of strength cloth ever stalk. Time was, I walked, nor ever felt tired. Now am I tired, albe I never walk. And the Shaykh held by the hand a youth cast in beauty's mould, all elegance and perfect grace, so fair that his comeliness deserved to be proverbial. For he was as a green bough, or the tender young of the roe, ravishing every heart with his loveliness, and subduing every soul with his coquetry and amorous ways. It was of him the poet spake when he said, Beauty they brought with him to make compare, but Beauty hung her head in shame and care. Quoth they, "O Beauty, hast thou seen his like?" And Beauty cried, "His like? Not anywhere." They stinted not their going, O my lady, till all went down by the trap door, and did not reappear for an hour, or rather more, at the end of which time the slaves and the old man came up without the youth, and replacing the iron plate and carefully closing the door slab as it was before, they returned to the ship and made sail and were lost to my sight. When they turned away to depart, I came down from the tree, and, going to the place I had seen them fill up, scraped off and removed the earth, and in patience possessed my soul till I had cleared the whole of it away. Then appeared the trap door, which was of wood, in shape and size like a millstone, and when I lifted it up, it disclosed a winding staircase of stone. At this I marvelled, and descending the steps till I reached the last, found a fair hall spread with various kinds of carpets and silk stuffs, wherein a youth was sitting upon a raised couch and leaning back on a round cushion with a fan in his hand, and nosegays and posies of sweet-scented herbs and flowers before him. But he was alone, and not a soul near him in the great vault. When he saw me he turned pale, but I saluted him courteously and said, "Set thy mind at ease and calm thy fears. No harm shall come near thee. I am a man, like thyself, and the son of a king to boot, whom the decrees of destiny have sent to bear thee company and cheer thee in thy loneliness. But now tell me, what is thy story, and what causeth thee to dwell thus in solitude under the ground?" When he was assured that I was of his kind and no genie, he rejoiced, and his fine colour returned. And making me draw near to him, he said, "O my brother, my story is a strange story, and 'tis this. My father is a merchant jeweller possessed of great wealth, who hath white and black slaves travelling and trading on his account in ships and on camels, and trafficking with the most distant cities, but he was not blessed with a child, not even one. Now on a certain night he dreamed a dream that he should be favoured with a son who would be short-lived. So the morning dawned on my father, bringing him woe and weeping. On the following night my mother conceived, and my father noted down the date of her becoming pregnant. Time being fulfilled, she bare me, whereat my father rejoiced and made banquets, and called together the neighbours, and fed the fakirs and the poor, for that he had been blessed with issue near the end of his days. Then he assembled the astrologers and astronomers who knew the places of the planets, and the wizards and wise ones of the time, and men learned in horoscopes and nativities, and they drew out my birth scheme, and said to my father, "Thy son shall live to 15 years, but in his 15th there is a sinister aspect. And he safely tided over, he shall attain a great age. And the cause that threateneth him with death is this. In the sea of peril standeth the mountain magnetite, on whose summit is a horseman of yellow laton, seated on a horse also of brass, and bearing on his breast a tablet of lead. 50 days after this rider shall fall from his steed, thy son will die, and his slayer will be he who shoots down the horseman, a prince named Ajib, son of King Khazib." My father grieved with exceeding grief to hear these words, but reared me in tenderest fashion and educated me excellently well until my 15th year was told. 10 days ago news came to him that the horseman had fallen into the sea, and he who shot him down was named Ajib, son of King Khazib. My father thereupon wept bitter tears at the need of parting with me, and became like one possessed of a genie. However, being in mortal fear for me, he built me this place under the earth, and stocking it with all required for the few days still remaining, he brought me hither in a ship, and left me here. 10 are already past, and when the 40 shall have gone by without danger to me, he will come and take me away, for he hath done all this only in fear of Prince Ajib. Such, then, is my story, and the cause of my loneliness. When I heard this history, I marvelled, and said in my mind, I am the Prince Ajib who hath done all this, but as Allah is with me, I will surely not slay him. So said I to him, O my lord, far from thee be this hurt and harm, and then, please Allah, thou shalt not suffer cark nor care nor aught disquietude, for I will tarry with thee and serve thee as a servant, and then wend my ways. And after having borne thee company during the 40 days, I will go with thee to thy home, where thou shalt give me an escort of some of thy Mamluks, with whom I may journey back to my own city, and the Almighty shall requite thee for me." He was glad to hear these words, when I rose and lighted a large wax candle, and trimmed the lamps and the 3 lanterns. And I set on meat and drink and sweetmeats. We ate and drank, and sat talking over various matters till the greater part of the night was gone, when he lay down to rest, and I covered him up, and went to sleep myself. Next morning I arose, and warmed a little water, and then lifted him gently so as to awake him, and brought him in the warm water wherewith he washed his face, and said to me, "Heaven requite thee for me with every blessing, O youth! By Allah, if I get quit of this danger, and am saved from him whose name is Ajib bin Khazib, I will make my father reward thee and send thee home healthy and wealthy, and if I die, then my blessing be upon thee." I answered, "May the day never dawn on which evil shall betide thee, and may Allah make my last day before thy last day." Then I set before him somewhat of food, and we ate, and I got ready perfumes for fumigating the hall, wherewith he was pleased. Moreover, I made him a mancala cloth, and we played and ate sweetmeats, and we played again, and took our pleasure till nightfall, when I rose and lighted the lamps, and set before him somewhat to eat, and sat telling him stories till the hours of darkness were far spent. Then he lay down to rest, and I covered him up and rested also. And thus I continued to do, O my lady, for days and nights, and affection for him took root in my heart, and my sorrow was eased, and I said to myself, the astrologers lied when they predicted that he should be slain by Ajib bin Khazib. By Allah, I will not slay him. I ceased not ministering to him, and conversing, and carousing with him, and telling him all manner of tales for 39 days. On the 40th night the youth rejoiced and said, "O my brother wa-Laylah, praise be to Allah, who hath preserved me from death, and this is by thy blessing and the blessing of thy coming to me, and I pray God that he restore thee to thy native land. But now, O my brother, I would thou warm me some water for the ghusl ablution, and do thou kindly bathe me and change my clothes." I replied, "With love and gladness," and I heated water in plenty, and carrying it in to him, washed his body all over the washing of health, with meal of lupins, and rubbed him well, and changed his clothes, and spread him a high bed whereon he lay down to rest, being drowsy after bathing. Then he said, "O my brother, cut me up a watermelon, and sweeten it with a little sugar candy." So I went to the storeroom, and bringing out a fine watermelon I found there, set it on a platter, and laid it before him, saying, "O my master, hast thou not a knife?" "Here it is," answered he, "over my head upon the high shelf." So I got up in haste, and taking the knife drew it from its sheath, but my foot slipped in stepping down, and I fell heavily upon the youth, holding in my hand the knife, which hastened to fulfil what had been written on the day that decided the destinies of man, and buried itself, as if planted, in the youth's heart. He died on the instant. When I saw that he was slain, and knew that I had slain him, maugre myself, I cried out with an exceeding loud and bitter cry, and beat my face, and rent my raiment, and said, "Verily we be Allah's, and unto him we be returning, O Moslems! O folk fain of Allah, there remained for this youth but one day of the 40 dangerous days which the astrologers and the learned had foretold for him, and the predestined death of this beautiful one was to be at my hand. Would Heaven I had not tried to cut the watermelon! What dire misfortune is this I must bear, fife or loathe? What a disaster! What an affliction! O Allah mine, I implore thy pardon, and declare to thee my innocence of his death. But what God willeth, let that come to pass." And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 16th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O suspicious king, that Ajib thus continued his tale to the lady. When I was certified that I had slain him, I arose, and ascending the stairs replaced the trap door, and covered it with the earth as before. Then I looked out seawards, and saw the ship cleaving the waters, and making for the island, wherefore I was afeard, and said, The moment they come and see the youth done to death, they will know 'twas I who slew him, and will slay me without respite. So I climbed up into a high tree, and concealed myself among its leaves, and hardly had I done so, when the ship anchored, and the slaves landed with the ancient man, the youth's father, and made direct for the place, and when they removed the earth, they were surprised to see it soft. Then they raised the trap door, and went down, and found the youth lying at full length, clothed in fair new garments, with a face beaming after the bath, and the knife deep in his heart. At the sight they shrieked and wept, and beat their faces, loudly cursing the murderer, whilst a swoon came over the Shaykh, so that the slaves deemed him dead, unable to survive his son. At last they wrapped the slain youth in his clothes, and carried him up, and laid him on the ground, covering him with a shroud of silk. Whilst they were making for the ship, the old man revived, and gazing on his son, who was stretched out, fell on the ground, and strewed dust over his head, and smote his face, and plucked out his beard. And his weeping redoubled as he thought of his murdered son, and he swooned away once more. After a while, a slave went and fetched a strip of silk, whereupon They laid the old man and sat down at his head. All this took place, and I was on the tree above them, watching everything that came to pass. And my heart became hoary before my head waxed grey, for the hard lot which was mine, and for the distress and anguish I had undergone, and I fell to reciting: How many a joy by Allah's will hath fled, with flight escaping sight of wisest head! How many a sadness shall begin the day, yet grow right gladsome ere the day is sped! How many a weal trips on the heels of ill, causing the mourner's heart with joy to thrill! But the old man, O my lady, ceased not from his swoon till near sunset, when he came to himself, and looking upon his dead son, he recalled what had happened, and how what he had dreaded had come to pass, and he beat his face and head, and recited these couplets: Racked is my heart by parting from my friends, and two rills ever from my eyelids flow. With them went forth my hopes, ah, well away! What shift remaineth me to say or do? Would I had never looked upon their sight! What shift, fair sirs, when paths e'er strainer grow? What charm shall calm my pangs when this wise burn, longings of love which in my vitals glow? Would I had trod with them the road of death, ne'er had befell us twain this parting blow. Allah, I pray the Truthful show me wrath, and mix our lives, nor part them evermore. How blest were we, as death one roof we dwelt, conjoined in joys, nor recking aught of woe, till Fortune shot us with the severance shaft. Ah, who shall patient bear such parting throe? And dart of death struck down amid the tribe, the aegis pearl that morn saw brightest show. I cried the while his case took speech, and said, Would Heaven, my son, death mote his doom foreslow, which be the readiest road with thee to meet. My son, for whom I would my soul bestow? If sun I call him no, the sun cloth set. If moon I call him, wane the moons, ah, no! O sad mischance of thee, O doom of days! Thy place none other love shall ever know. Thy sire distracted sees thee, but despairs, by wit or wisdom fate to overthrow. Some evil eye this day hath cast its spell, and foul befall him as it foul befell. Then he sobbed a single sob, and his soul fled his flesh. The slaves shrieked aloud, Alas, our lord! and showered dust on their heads, and redoubled their weeping and wailing. Presently they carried their dead master to the ship side by side with his dead son, and having transported all the stuff from the dwelling to the vessel, set sail, and disappeared from mine eyes. I descended from the tree, and raising the trap door, went down into the underground dwelling, where everything reminded me of the youth, and I looked upon the poor remains of him, and began repeating these verses: Their tracks I see, and pine with pain and pang, and on deserted hearths I weep and yearn, and Him I pray who doomed them depart, some day vouchsafe the boon of safe return. Then, O my lady, I went up again by the trap door, and every day I used to wander round about the island, and every night I returned to the underground hall. Thus I lived for a month, till at last, looking at the western side of the island, I observed that every day the tides ebbed, leaving shallow water for which the flow did not compensate, and by the end of the month the sea showed dry land in that direction. At this I rejoiced, making certain of my safety. So I arose, and fording what little was left of the water, got me to the mainland, where I fell in with great heaps of loose sand, in which even a camel's hoof would sink up to the knee. However, I emboldened my soul, and wading through the sand, behold, a fire shone from afar, burning with a blazing light. So I made for it, hoping haply to find succour, and broke out into these verses: Belike Fortune may her bridle turn, and Time bring weal, although he's jealous hight. Forward my hopes, and further all my needs, and past ills with present weals requite. And when I drew near the fire aforesaid, lo! it was a palace with gates of copper burnished red, which when the rising sun shone thereon, gleamed and glistened from afar, showing what had seemed to me a fire. I rejoiced in the sight, and sat down over against the gate, but I was hardly settled in my seat before there met me 10 young men clothed in sumptuous gear, and all were blind of the left eye, which appeared as plucked out. They were accompanied by a sheikh, an old man, and much I marvelled at their appearance, and their all being blind of the same eye. When they saw me, they saluted me with the salam, and asked me of my case and my history, whereupon I related to them all what had befallen me, and what full measure of misfortune was mine. Marvelling at my tale, they took me to the mansion, where I saw arranged round the hall 10 couches, each with its blue bedding and coverlet of blue stuff, and amiddlemost stood a smaller couch furnished like them with blue and nothing else. As we entered, each of the youths took his seat on his own couch, and the old man seated himself upon the smaller one in the middle, saying to me, O youth, sit thee down on the floor, and ask not of our case nor of the loss of our eyes. Presently he rose up and set before each young man some meat in a charger and drink in a large mazer, treating me in like manner. And after that they sat questioning me concerning my adventures and what had betided me, and I kept telling them my tale till the night was far spent. Then said the young man, O our Shaykh, wilt not thou set before us our ordinary? The time is come. He replied, With love and gladness, and rose, and entering a closet disappeared, but presently returned, bearing on his head 10 trays, each covered with a strip of blue stuff. He set a tray before each youth, and lighting 10 wax candles, he stuck one upon each tray, and drew off the covers, and lo, under them was naught but ashes and powdered charcoal and kettle soot. Then all the young men tucked up their sleeves to the elbows, and fell a weeping and a wailing, and then they blackened their faces, and smeared their clothes, and buffeted their brows, and beat their breasts, continually exclaiming, We were sitting at our ease, but our forwardness brought us unease. They ceased not to do this till dawn drew nigh, when the old man rose and heated water for them, and they washed their faces, and donned other and clean clothes. Now when I saw this, O my lady, for very wonderment my senses left me, and my wits went wild, and heart and head were full of thought, till I forgot what had betided me, and I could not keep silence, feeling I fain must speak out and question them of these strangenesses. So I said to them, How come ye to do this after we have been so open-hearted and frolicsome? Thanks be to Allah ye be all sound and sane, yet actions such as these befit none but madmen, or those possessed of an evil spirit. I conjure you by all that is dearest to you, why stint ye to tell me your history, and the cause of your losing your eyes, and your blackening your faces with ashes and soot? Hereupon they turned to me and said, O young man, hearken not to the youthtide's suggestion, and question us no questions. Then they slept, and I with them, and when they awoke, the old man brought us somewhat of food, and after we had eaten, and the plates and goblets had been removed, they sat conversing till nightfall, when the old man rose, and lit the wax candles and lamps, and set meat and drink before us. After we had eaten and drunken, we sat conversing and carousing in companionage till the noon of night, when they said to the old man, Bring us our ordinary, for the hour of sleep is at hand. So he rose, and brought them the trays of soot and ashes, and they did as they had done on the preceding night, nor more nor less. I abode with them after this fashion for the space of a month, during which time they used to blacken their faces with ashes every night, and to wash and change their raiment when the morn was young. And I but marvelled the more, and my scruples and curiosity increased to such a point that I had to forego even food and drink. At last I lost command of myself, for my heart was aflame with fire unquenchable, and love unconcealable, and I said, O young man, will ye not relieve my trouble, and acquaint me with the reason of thus blackening your faces, and the meaning of your words, We were sitting at our ease, but our forwardness brought us unease? Quoth they, 'Twere better to keep these things secret. Still I was bewildered by their doings, to the point of abstaining from eating and drinking, and at last, wholly losing patience, quoth I to them, There is no help for it, ye must acquaint me with what is the reason of these doings. They replied, We kept our secret only for thy good. To gratify thee will bring down evil upon thee, and thou wilt become a monocular, even as we are. I repeated, There is no help for it, and if ye will not, let me leave you and return to mine own people, and be at rest from seeing these things, for the proverb saith, Better ye bide, and I take my leave, for what eye sees not, heart shall never grieve. Thereupon they said to me, Remember, O youth, that should ill befall thee, we will not again harbour thee, nor suffer thee to abide amongst us. And bringing a ram, they slaughtered it and skinned it. Lastly they gave me a knife, saying, Take this skin, and stretch thyself upon it, and we will sew it around thee. Presently there shall come to thee a certain bird, hight Ruch, that will catch thee up in his pounces, and tower high in air, and then set thee down on a mountain. When thou feelest he is no longer flying, rip open the pelt with this blade, and come out of it. The bird will be scared, and will fly away, and leave thee free. After this, fare for half a day, and the march will place thee at a palace wondrous fair to behold, towering high in the air, and builded of calange. line aloes and sandalwood, plated with red gold, and studded with all manner emeralds and costly gems fit for seal rings. Enter it, and thou shalt win to thy wish, for we have all entered that palace, and such is the cause of our losing our eyes, and of our blackening our faces. Were we now to tell thee our stories, it would take too long a time, for each and every of us lost his left eye by an adventure of his own. I rejoiced at their words, and they did with me as they said, and the bird Ruch bore me off and set me down on the mountain. Then I came out of the skin and walked on till I reached the palace. End of section 10 of The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night. Recording by Kalinda in Raymond, New Hampshire on November 18th, 2007.